Whew. All right. I think we've closed all the windows and everything. I feel like I say this every weekend, but it's like just one of those mornings. I started the stream and then didn't put the actual stream up. Why is VLC up? VLC doesn't need to be up. Let's quit VLC. Bevy 15 game is no longer Bevy 15 game. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to play with upgrading to 0.16. I think that we went over this a little bit last weekend, but most things are fine. Where is it? We are in 0.16 RC, so we can probably upgrade to the regular version, which will be cool. I think IS Progress has the RC release. Avian's still on that Git commit. Everything else is fine. Skein has an actual release, so we can upgrade there. Let's just bump some of these. Asset Loader. I don't know if Asset Loader has a release. Let me get rid of some of the desktops. I just closed all of my windows on, so I don't have 50 million of them. I also closed Photoshop, Ableton, and DaVinci, which I had all running at the same time, which would have been great for stream. I want to use Bevy Enhanced Input, or at least get into it a little bit. I haven't used it all that much. I've kind of looked at it a little bit, but we were using Leafwing, and Leafwing is great, but it seems like Bevy Enhanced Input is the future. So we are going to go with Bevy Enhanced Input moving forward, I think. This looks like we're still on RC3 for Bevy Asset Loader, which is fine. This totally works. Oh, it's funny that we get warnings now for not being up to 2024. That's funny. But yeah, so a Bevy Asset Loader RC should be fine. We're on RC3, so we don't need to upgrade. 0.16 is out now. The video's on the channel, so if you're in the stream, then I assume you watched the video, because I don't know how you made it here if you didn't see a video on the channel. IS Progress is RC, but I think that's fine. Avian, git commit 7211. Let's just make sure that we are looking at the right commit 7211. This is the one I've been using over the last week, so I'm pretty sure it works. Saturday itertool, Saturday JSON, all don't matter. Non-max is something that we use inside of the like shader code and whatever. Bevy Skein has its release, so let's just do a build here. Now we had some issues last week with a shader and some pipeline stuff. I did fix that. Hey, love your content. It's been a huge help in making Bevy approachable. Really excited about 16. Just upgraded to it yesterday. Sweet. That's awesome. How'd the upgrade go for you? Morning. Morning, Vexar. Morning, Alejandro. I don't know if it's morning by you, but it is certainly morning by me. Cool. Yeah, so I fixed the shader from last week. I think I did it in the Bevy 15 project. I definitely did it in the Bevy examples. So if we get a compile error here, it'll just be a compile error that I've already fixed. If I can find it in the code, wherever I decided to put it, I think it is, there's post-process. It's not Uber material. Where did I put my shader code? section texture. That's what I named it. Should probably put that in a separate crate because it is kind of totally standalone. GPU code is a little bit heavy in terms of the amount of code, so I'm just going to make the code a little bit smaller. Most of the code specifics don't matter. The thing that I wanted to mention, which I'll actually be able to tell if I... Yeah, okay. So this right here, this is going to be a compile error. Or not going to be... Actually, so, sorry. This is not going to be a compile error. This is in the Q custom meshes function that we're using. So effectively, this is saying like, what do we actually want to render? Because this is a custom render phase. And we have to kind of like select the visible entities. So this looked a little bit like a filter in 0.15. It is not in 0.16. This is the correct syntax in 0.16, but it will silently filter out all of the meshes if you use the wrong one. So that'll fail for us. I think everything else is pretty fixed. You also upgraded. How'd your upgrade go, Vexar? Yours was really simple, DJ. The only thing you needed to do was upgrade to 2024, which you probably should have done a few months ago when the stable version was released. Yeah, 2024 is great, and we're getting let chains in a few weeks. I don't have any concept of time. Let chains are coming. Let chains got stabilized, so we're definitely getting them, which is very exciting. Hello, hello. You see Bevy last week, you're interested? Nice. Avian and Bevy embedded assets don't have 0.16. Yes. Bevy embedded assets. I don't think I've seen that one, actually, which is pretty rare for me. Avian's main branch does work, for sure. Bevy embedded assets. Ah, this is a mockers. Great. That makes sense. Embed your asset folder inside your binary for easier releases. That's cool. I guess this is like if you want to ship a specific file instead of like a folder. Are let chains if, let, and let. Let chains. I believe this was it. I don't know if I'll be able to pull up the stabilization PR. When was this? But yeah, it's the if let this and let some and let some and let some and let some. So instead of doing like a bunch of blocks of nested like let or whatever, you can do them all in one chain. I actually don't know how this interacts with... Well, I guess, yeah, I guess all of these need to pass, otherwise you get the else. So it'll be fun. Let chains are good. Let chains are something everybody wants. But let chain stabilization. Stabilize the let chain. It would be nice if this actually sent me to like... I don't want to click on that website. I'll click on this one. This one's fine. So let chains were stabilized 4 days ago? No. This was updated 4 days ago. If it's only been 4 days since they were stabilized, I will be very, very questionable about the concept of time that I have in my head. I thought it was merged. a little bit longer ago than that. In any case, it is stabilized and it is coming. So or would be weird. How would the variables work? I don't know. I'm not really like a language design person overall. So when new features come in, I'm not somebody who is like, oh, we need this feature in Rust or Rust is terrible or whatever. I'm very much a person who is like, wow, language design is complicated. And yeah, so I don't know how that would work. Especially if there were a bunch of chains of them, because then you kind of get back into like, I don't know, match chains maybe. Who knows? But that is a, we'll call it above my pay grade. You're currently working through the Rust book. You've been getting a little overwhelmed and trying to understand how you should structure your project and how to decide which features to build in what order. Any resources you could recommend? I think that if you're just going through the Rust book, then my suggestion would be mess it up a lot. More than anything else, right? You will figure out how to structure a project if you try to structure things and then you run into the problems that bad structures cause, right? Like if you stick everything in main and then you want to write a test, you're going to go, wow, it's really hard to do this. And then you're going to know why everybody puts everything in lib, right? And like there are things that people do that don't matter as well, right? Like there are things that people do that are just like their opinions, man. You know? So that would be my suggestion actually. It would be write more Rust programs and then the structure that you like will fall out of that and you will run into problems and then solve them, right? And once you solve them, you will understand why people are actually doing things the way that they're doing them rather than just like copying what somebody said on the internet, you know? Especially since this is like an earlier thing for you, right? Um, so no outline here. Because you'll be writing programs that are like reasonably small comparatively, right? Like you're not looking for architecture for 100,000 line programs. That is like later for you, so to speak. Yeah, right. Like you're not going to take on 100,000 line Rust program right now and then write it perfectly. That would be, I mean, if you did, then good for you, because I don't think I could have done that in my first Rust year. So we've got our outline shader and everything working again. And really the thing was this with mesh 3D filter. So everything's working, right? We're upgraded to 0.16. We kind of finished this last stream. So I think I'm just going to do a commit first. I've got a git commit message ready to go because I've been bumping a bunch of things to 0.16 stable. And then we need to do character control stuff. And this is a little bit awkward because I think Bevy Tenua was waiting for the stable release to do the work to do a release. So I'm not expecting Bevy Tenua to quite have a release yet, although it looks like they might have been working on it. No, this was a different release. So they actually did a 0.15 compatible release with a radar. Yeah, obstacle radar is new. So obstacle radar is part of this 0.23 release, which is for 0.15. So they didn't do the 0.16 release yet, which is one of the reasons that we're kind of just like dropping it at the moment. I'm open to going back to it, but in the meantime, we do need to do an input crate upgrade. Got a couple small CLI tools built, but they're super minimal. Yeah, exactly. Like in my opinion, the rough learning progression is like you write the hello world, which is like one line effectively, right? And then you go to like small 10-line programs, and then like small CLI tools that actually do something at like 100 lines. And then once you start getting into like 1,000 lines, you start like write a bunch of 1,000-line programs. And once you accumulate kind of like more than 10,000 1,000-line programs, that's when you're kind of like, okay, what does a 10,000-line program actually look like? And it's the same kind of thing. Like once you get to 10,000, you write a couple of 10,000-line programs, a few of them, you get to more than 100K lines written in your Rust programming career. And then you can start to kind of consider like, okay, what does it look like to actually build a 100,000-line program? But like 100,000-line programs are huge, just to be clear. Like that is like a massive amount of code, right? Especially for one person to write. So like there's no rush either. I think most of the crates that I am involved with are, aside from like Bevy or something, right? Most of like the Bevy plugin crates or anything like that, are like in the single digit thousands. So maybe some of the more complicated or like more of the GPU based ones are like 5 to 10,000, and most other things are way less than that. What are you making? So the game is, well, it is a game, but I've removed the player control and the camera control, so we can't actually see anything. And you can't actually do anything right now because all the input is missing. But it's basically a game where you pick up a box, you move across a platform, and you get it to a goal. This was kind of my original intent with this game was to do like a 4-month cycle, try to build something that can go out on ideally Steam, but if not, then just itch or something. What ended up happening in the last cycle, so that was like the Bevy 15 cycle, which is why it's named Bevy 15 game. My intention is usually to do a new game for every cycle. But what happened last cycle is instead of working on the game every weekend, I built Skein. Because one of the things that I felt like could be way better is the interaction between how I do things in Blender and how my Bevy application runs. So Skein is, I think I just have it installed unless I messed stuff up in the last little bit. So Skein is like, if you come in here and you have a cube, then you can come down to the Skein panel. You can go, oh, I wanted this to have, I don't know, bloom. Why this would have bloom, I don't know. But let's say we have bloom on this cube now. And then we have like all the bloom stuff here and whatnot. I guess I didn't upgrade. That looks like it doesn't have the, oh, you know why it doesn't have defaults? Because I didn't fetch them. Because I decided to go with I think I'm going to remove that functionality. So if we run this, right, the game is running over here. I'm going to get rid of this because I was trying to demo something and then failed at it. We're going to fetch the registry if, did I not run the registry? Let me check my game. I don't have any other Bevy stuff running, right? Alacrity, yada, yada. Sometimes I have so many things running that I have like a Bevy app hiding somewhere that's just still running. Okay, so let's go to main, which is where my plugins would be. Let's go to Skein. Skein is set. We had this plugin set up, so everything should be good. Let me do my debug query over here, because this is something we want to work. So this is my Skein like working directory. Let's see. New fetch presets. Fetch types. Okay, it looks like it's running. So maybe I just had some weird network hiccup. Returned an error. What is the error? Let's look at the error. That doesn't look like an error to me. That looks like a successful request to me. I must have another Bevy app running somewhere, is what's happening here. I don't know where it is, so I'll have to, maybe it's like latent, maybe I didn't kill it, but I'll look for it in a second. You've seen Bevy enhanced input a lot lately. Is the community recommended solution now for input handling? Your start on a bigger project, use Leafwing in the past. Yes, I would say yes. I think that Leafwing is fine. You could still choose to use it. It's still going to be like maintained. But if you use Leafwing, you probably know Alice works on Leafwing. Alice is now collaborating with the people who are working on Bevy enhanced input, and this is kind of like the thing that they're trying to work on to get to something that could be upstreamed into Bevy, so to speak. Right. So yes, I think Bevy enhanced input looks like the future at this point. They've been working on it for quite a while. I didn't jump on it right away. I waited for them to do a little bit of development, but I think 0.16 is going to be the right time for me to make the switch. Yeah, Skein is nice. Also, something you noted is that you can't have Rapier colliders, but Avian has a collider builder, which does work in Blender. But Avian is better for Bevy anyway, so it doesn't really matter anymore. I think that so the thing that Avian does with that collider constructor can be done in Rapier. I think just nobody that uses Rapier has like wanted that functionality, if that makes sense. So like the only reason Rapier doesn't have like a collider constructor or something like that, and just to be clear, I don't know if it does because I really don't use Rapier all that much anymore. So it might have grown this at some point, but the only reason it doesn't, if it doesn't, is because nobody did it. You know, it's not like you could do it in your own app if you wanted to, right? You could make a cuboid collider component on insert hook or on add hook, then insert the Rapier collider with the configuration from the cuboid collider component and use the cuboid collider component in Bevy or in Blender, right? Like this is not a, there's no like technical limitation to that working. Let's see, PS, not where name equals make. I don't know how I'm gonna find this. Got enough processes running. I feel like I'm not gonna know what the errant Bevy game, if it's running, is. Although it just worked, right? So the thing that really confuses me right now is actually that well, here's the question, right? Let's see which version I'm using in the first place. Let's make this a little bit smaller because it does need to be. So we're 0.16 from the extensions. That should be fine. Right. The other thing about my setup compared to everybody else's is I mess with my code all the time. So I'm like always chucking in new versions of Skein into Blender. And I do mess stuff up sometimes. Skein presets not found. Why would Skein presets not be found? Skein presets wouldn't... Wait, if Skein presets isn't found, that's supposed to be a sustainable error too. Did I make a mistake? I think I made a mistake. Unless I didn't actually update and I thought I updated. That's the other thing that could have happened here. So cargo lock Skein. That's the toml, not the lock file. Cargo lock, Bevy Skein. The other way to do this is, yeah, see, we are actually using an old version of Skein. That's the issue. 0.2 and RC2 are actually compatible. That's the problem. So if I go in here and I do, what is it, tree-i Bevy Skein, this is something I end up using a lot when I'm doing, or in the past when I've done Bevy upgrades before the release candidate process was in place. This was something you ended up having to do a lot. So if you do cargo tree, you can do an inverse dependency tree and basically say from Bevy Skein, what is causing this to have a version in my application? So in our case, I need to just run cargo update. And cargo update should, if we look at this list, update Bevy Skein from RC2 to 0.2. So I guess I was on, there was an RC3 that I published. And RC3 had the presets functionality. So that's what's going on there. I think that I want the Blender add-on to be able to sustain that endpoint not existing. So I need to do some testing for that later. I'm going to make a note. That is supposed to be sustainable. That is supposed to not be a thing that you need. So I just need to make sure that I make a note for myself over here. Make sure Skein Blender add-on works if presets endpoint fails. Because theoretically, the idea is like we try to get the presets. If we can't get the presets, then it doesn't break everything. It just provides all the default implementations and things like that. So it shouldn't error out like that. I do think like everything is fine. So I don't actually know, like that error might just be a leftover log, but it is scary in the sense that like if I run the fetch command and then I see an error, I think everything failed. But the preset endpoint is allowed to fail. So I need to make sure that we silence that error is really what needs to happen here. Anyway, I was going to say something about Skein, and I went on like a 20-minute tangent. But yeah, we could do collider constructor here or whatever. You know, do whatever constructor we want. Set up drivers, whatever. These days, I didn't make the fetch request yet, so I can't show that off. But yeah, anyway, so we were talking about the game and what I was working on. So we were working on the game, and we were figuring out that the way I had my Blender integration going was basically like coming down here to custom properties, hitting new. This would pop up like this, so it like defaults to prop in 1.0, at which point you need to go into here, you need to change like the type to maybe string, you need to change the property name to, you know, my property. The default value doesn't really matter. You hit OK, you end up with my property with a 1.0 because you couldn't change it, and then you need to like type in your value, and like you can mess up the key name, you can mess up like a whole bunch of stuff here So like every individual property, like if I wanted to do the same thing on camera, like those custom properties don't exist anymore. I need to redo the whole thing. Do string, do my custom property, you know, hit enter, enter my value, run my application, realize I misspelled it, come back in here, type my property. Like it's fine, it works, but it's definitely not the experience of doing like, here I want a collider constructor, insert that for me, you know, give me a capsule or whatever, set it to this height, that thing. So I think that what it's going to end up happening through these cycles is um, we're going to keep doing that kind of thing. We're going to keep doing like build a game. If we run into something, we'll just fix it, which could mean that at the end of the day, the amount of time that I have in a cycle to build, say, like the Bevy 15 game here, kind of amounts to like a game jam's amount of time. It's like 48 to 56 hours or something like that. So it's really not that much. It's not like I'm working on the game all week. I really only work on it in the weekends during these streams. So it's like 4 hours on a Saturday, unless I feel like getting into something. So this should be good now. So let's do the fetch. Nothing fails anymore because I have the version I thought I had. And then if we go to like camera, right? Remove the component off camera and we do bloom. If we insert bloom, bloom now has all the default implementation values that Bevy has. So before this Skein release, you had to remember these values or go look them up and use them, which is like fine. Because like how many times do you actually set bloom, right? But it's better this way. It's better to have this, you know? So I've really enjoyed that. That's great. I'm really happy with Skein overall. Skein was a great project. It definitely took away from the game in terms of like we didn't get all that much done on the game. Like it works, or actually doesn't work right now because we removed the whole input handling system in the 0.16 upgrade. But it worked. We could do things where like the player was using Tenua, could pick up a box, could go through, could get to the goal, could hit barriers and get respawned, a whole bunch of other stuff like that. So the game worked. It's not necessarily like an amazing fun game, but I think Skein came out of the last cycle, and I really think that was a positive output. Hello, Plevin. How are you? What is Skein? Is it like a level editor? Skein is a Bevy Blender integration. I don't know if you know what Bevy is. You might not. But what I was just talking about is Skein. So this panel in here in Blender is a thing that I built. If you want to know more about it, it's bevyskein.dev. But basically you can like click on this and go, hey, I want a collider from Avian. Insert a collider onto the object. Or if I don't remove it accidentally, because, you know, I'd be like that. You could have a collider, a cuboid. If I wanted this to be like driven by the size of the variable, then we can add a driver, and I can do like dimensions 0. And now we have a driver that drives the value of the cuboid collider, which is an avian component, which will get instantiated inside of Bevy. And when we scale this cube, which it would be nice if I actually showed the thing that was scaling. When we scale this cube, the value of that X length actually changes because we're driving it via the dimensions. So yeah, this is just an avian collider. I've gotten the reflection information from Bevy. We use that to build a UI inside of Blender. You insert the data, you deal with the data using Blender isms like drivers, and you can just set these values arbitrarily to, this is a gigantic collider now. And then that comes through the GLTF exports. So there's nothing like special that you need to do from a usage perspective. When you export GLTF, this stuff comes with the GLTF. When you spawn it inside of Bevy, the same way you spawn any other scene, the GLTF stuff gets instantiated, and that's just that. Like, it just works. There's no there actually is Rust side API now. You can now insert presets, which is the thing I was mentioning before you came in. So if you look at the bloom stuff here, right? Let's say I made a change and I don't like it. I can reset it to the default, and it'll reset all the default values, which I'm very happy with. So I'm very happy with that output. I know that was a long and rambly, what are we working on today? But have you ever had that issue when you try to run cargo, sometimes it just doesn't compile and runs the binary that was already compiled? Or is that something you're doing wrong? If you haven't changed anything, then it would run effectively the thing that was already built, right? Like if you have a very small program, for example, and you do a cargo run and you haven't changed anything since last time, then it should run basically instantly, right? Because all of the intermediary build artifacts are in your target directory, and they'll just get used. They won't get rebuilt because there's no reason to rebuild them. There are some kind of advanced use cases where if you do things with like a build.rs file, you can end up in situations where you haven't given the instruction for it to rebuild. But I assume if you're asking the question, you're not doing that because that's kind of an advanced thing that not many people actually end up doing. So yeah, I would say if you're making changes, actually, if you're not making changes, then it should just run what you have, more or less. If you are making small changes, it should compile pretty quickly and run. If you make larger changes or change like your cargo toml or something, then it'll take even longer and it'll just be obvious that it's rebuilding. But if you have a small application, it's not always necessarily obvious. So let's get rid of Blender for now. Today is about input because we need to get our little character working again. So the thing here is Bevy enhanced input. I think this release is 16. Yeah, it's 16 RC5. So interesting that the stable release targeted the RC version. I guess RC5 was like the stable release. Like they were the same thing effectively, so it doesn't really matter. So let's get Bevy enhanced input in here, which I do think is kind of like the future of Bevy input. So we've got a prelude that we'll end up having to pull in, and the enhanced input plugin. And then we need to read a little bit about how to do actions, how to do controls, things like that. Again, we're doing a little bit of learning together today because I do not have that much experience with Bevy enhanced input. It is something that I think that will be very good to use, but we're just going to dunk it into like the same place as everything else. So not too worried about it. Actions represent what the user can do. Crouch, fire, unit structs that implement input action. Each action has an output. The value the action outputs when you assign bindings to it. Okay, so like jump will be a bool, move will be a vec2. That makes sense. Debug is required. and output is the only required like macro parameter, it looks like. You appreciate this kind of work. Watching someone learning their process for figuring something out teaches you more than just going, "This is how you do it" kind of content. Yeah, I think that one of the things that I really try to do in the stuff that I create is like there are things that I just know, right? Like the video that I shipped yesterday about spawning. I actually personally felt like that was almost a useless video from like a production perspective. Like it's hard for me to, in some sense, like I know it's useful and I know there are people that benefited from it, right? But for me personally, like how to spawn stuff is so far that way in things that I know about that I feel a little bit like I'm explaining that 2 + 2 = 4 when I'm making the video. And it's kind of hard to spend like 5 hours making that video because I'm like, oh, I'm going to make this and I'm going to ship it. And then, but then it's always important to remember that like there are people who don't even know what Bevy is. And thus that video is like super useful for them. So I try to make it clear that I am not like all knowing. You know, I'm not omnipotent in any way. There are things I don't know, things I don't do. And like figuring stuff out is part of the process, right? Also, like I don't ever want people to think that like I made a video and just because I said something it's absolute fact. You know? Like I do a lot of research and I check my videos quite a bit. But I never want it to be like, yeah, I don't know. Like I'm never gonna make a video like Bevy is the one true game engine. Like, you know, I'm never gonna do that. Having giant X's through other game engines in my thumbnails just doesn't feel good, you know? Like imagine somebody did like an X through your face or something on a thumbnail. Like that feels bad. You learned from it. You didn't know about Spawn Batch. That's really helpful for your game you're working on. But yeah, knowing how you got there and learned is helpful. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Like I know it's all useful. I think that it can be hard as somebody who like all of the spawning stuff is something that I have to know for everything else, right? So like it can be hard to go back into things that are already part of the like parcel of knowing how to do things. And recognize that there's value in explaining how to do that sometimes. I'm pretty decent about it now, but it's more about the feeling when I'm creating the videos. Like sometimes I wonder if a video that I make is going to be useful or not, and it's always useful. Just to be clear, like the video is always useful. It turns out, you basically can't make a useless video unless you don't share any information. Right, like if I just rambled and didn't say anything for half an hour, that would be a useless video. I guess it wouldn't even be useless because somebody might enjoy listening to me ramble, right? But like from an educational perspective, basically everything is useful. Yeah, I'm very against like how do I frame it? Like the self-selected group combat of tech, right? Like this crate versus that crate, or you know, like this is the future and everything else sucks. Like you're never gonna catch me saying that. And if you do, you should rightfully be like, Chris, you're being a little ridiculous right now. Okay, so input actions, we are gonna need move. So maybe we just throw this in now, even before we really know what we're doing. Controls is basically like where we used to have our controls. So we've got like pan tilt and some other things in here. So maybe setting stuff up in here is not a terrible idea. Just to get started. We do want the prelude in here. We're not going to use leafing, so I'm just going to get rid of it. So use Bevy enhanced input prelude star. So all of this is in now. So now we have move. We did have a move before. It was also a vec2. So far so good. It'll be funny because the camera won't move. So we'll still be like looking up in a weird direction, but hey, thanks for all the content. You're struggling to make a 2D Hollow Knight-like game, very basic, but you have a lot of fun making Bevy as a side project. Nice. I'm glad you're having fun. That's really the most important thing, especially if it's a side project. Right tool for the right job. You never prototype something, but absolutely would throw something together in another engine before you commit to working on it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everybody has, like, there's a reason that so many different engines and so many different frameworks and so many different tools exist, right? People like working in different ways. That's enough, you know? Like, I like to do it this way, therefore there is a whole crate and ecosystem built around doing it this way is fine. And that doesn't mean this other way is wrong, you know? Input contexts are a collection of actions that at a certain context, collection of actions that represent a certain context that the player can be in, like in car or on foot. Okay, so we get like, it feels like Bevy enhanced input might care about like whether we are jumping or not. Which is interesting because I wonder how that fits in with something like Tenua, which tries to also own that information. I wonder if anybody's tried to do like a Tenua enhanced input integration. My assumption is that you don't need to use these. But it's definitely an interesting question of like, and Bevy enhanced input wants to know or wants to like have input context, right? So at some point, if Bevy Tenua or another character controller wants to control the state machine that defines whether you are currently jumping or not, then how do you drive those two things back and forth? Currently, we don't have modalities, so I don't know that I'm going to do this. We could add like a default one, just because we're learning, right? So like, this is part of the information that we got when we very for the first time like tried to do anything, right? So like, this is not terrible. I can just throw this in. I can always change this later. I could take it out or whatever. It seems like input context might be a thing that they want us to use or is like intended to be used here. So I'm not really too concerned about it. We do basically just need to get to binding actions, but I am also interested in the mental model of Bevy enhanced input. Like, what is Bevy enhanced input from a like pedagogical and mental model perspective, so that I know where it fits in relation to everything else. How to create a plugin system like Minecraft when using a non-GC language like Rust. A plugin, you mean a modding ecosystem? I think modding is interesting, especially when it comes to Minecraft, because you can do things like modify an event that is currently being sent and then keep sending it later. Right? So like, you have like, if Minecraft has system A that fires event A, and like system B that receives event A and does something with it, you can have mod C modify event A into A.5 and then continue to forward that on to B, and B will get the other stuff, which is a really interesting kind of thing. I believe that is also possible in Bevy. I think you can intercept events. I don't remember how to do it. honestly. But I remember that coming through and getting merged. But I would say that modding, when it comes to Rust and when it comes to Bevy specifically, is kind of an open question. So there's a modding channel in the Bevy Discord, which will have significantly better information. There's plugins like Bevy Mod Scripting, which allow you to do like Lua scripting and stuff like that to whatever Bevy app that you're building. To me, mods are like interesting, but not something that I feel like I need to build into my games. So I don't really work with them all that much. In my mind, I need to like ship a game that people want to use to the extent that they would also want to mod it before I like modding is useful to me. Modding is like actually changing the code without like a system, but they do have their own plugin system, which is close to commands like /give. Yeah, the commands like /give and stuff, absolutely. You can definitely do that 100% with Rust and Bevy and stuff. You're spawning a player and a few enemies. They can hit each other. You also have a parallax background system that works fine. Have a physics system and you're there. You have to improve a lot. Yeah. Do you need to recompile the game for adding a new mod? Minecraft doesn't. We can even use Lua for modding. You can use, so the thing I just showed uses Lua. That's not what I wanted. That's a different thing. Bevy mod scripting. Bevy mod scripting allows you to plug Lua into your Bevy game in a variety of ways and like use Lua scripting. So you wouldn't need to recompile if you were using Bevy mod scripting, for example, or had your own like similar support for it. If you were going to let people mod it using Rust code and you didn't have a target like Wasm for them to target, then you would. But that's like recompiling the whole game. That's not modding, you know? Like if you were going to distribute your game as source, you could definitely let people write in Rust. If you were going to like, but nobody's going to do that, right? So if you wanted people to write Rust, they could target Wasm. You could have Wasm time or something inside of your game, and that could be your scripting interface, that Wasm interface. You could also do Lua in the same way. You got the Lua runtime instead of like Wasm time or something, etc., etc. How about dynamic sprite or texture? Assets are all dynamic. So like in the sense that Bevy's asset system isn't tied to like compilation, if that makes sense. If we look at any of the examples that pull in even shaders, if we look at, let's say, it's going to be a bad example if I look at shaders though. But if we look at shaders, you can see like the shader asset path comes from like the assets directory in shaders custom material.wixel, right? WGSL. And that's just like a path that is plugged in here. Like Bevy's asset system can fetch from like HTTP endpoints at runtime. So yes, you can get dynamic assets in, like dynamic textures and stuff like that. You think Zed uses Wasm for their plugin system? I don't know. I haven't looked at Zed in a while. I know Zalige does. Zalige uses Wasm. I keep intending to try to write Zalige plugins, and I never get around to it. Zed uses Wasm for sure? Yeah, cool. Nice. Yeah, the share node does code review for C++ games. What if somebody did code review for Bevy? I mean, I would do code review for Bevy. I have people ask me to do code review all the time, but a lot of it is like private code bases that I can't share on YouTube videos. So to some extent, if people wanted to give, like if I had a steady stream of like code review stuff, I could do a code review channel for Rust and for Bevy. I think that the expanse of possible programs you can make with Rust can make that a little bit difficult. Like, I wouldn't review somebody's Linux kernel written in Rust, right? Or some like equivalent bare metal Rust OS system, right? That doesn't feel like something that I would code review. But like if somebody wanted me to look at their Bevy game on a video or something like that, I could definitely do that. As long as they're okay with me being like, well, there's two sides of it, right? One of them is like, especially in games, there isn't a whole lot of like definitive truth, right? So if it works, then it works. And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, right? But if it works and it's ugly, that really doesn't matter. So the code review gets a little bit weird, right? Because like, what do you code review? You definitely don't code review like, oh, I would have named this whatever, you know? But yeah, I mean, I've done code review in the past, for sure. Those videos do well. I think people appreciate them. But I do need kind of like a pipeline and some time to do it. Do I have a preferred contact if somebody wanted to send you a repo to review for the channel? Yeah, you could email me. It's chris@christopherbiscardi.com, or you could send me a link. Discord DMs are tough because I get a lot of them. So my Discord DMs are like very noisy, if that makes sense. So probably email is better. If I was going to do it over a longer period of time, I would probably set up some kind of form where people could submit like their Git repository or whatever. And I would require it to be open source and things like that, most likely. But yeah, as long as I can do things that are like useful for the ecosystem, I'm happy to make videos doing stuff like that. Right. Talking about code and being like, oh, let's figure out how this works. Let's look at it. Let's figure out how to get into it, how the module structure is, whatever. That all that kind of stuff can be useful for people. So I'm happy to do that kind of thing publicly and in videos. Doing it privately greatly constrains the utility of doing the review. So isn't necessarily worth it all the time. Okay, input context. We've made it 3 paragraphs into the documentation. Defining actions. We've got input actions. So we've got move and jump right now. I don't know if I copied jump. I think I copied on foot. So we've got move and on foot. Maybe we have jump as well. We had jump in our last game, so it's not really that much of a stretch for us to also have jump. And it gets us like 2 different kinds of variables to deal with, which is cool. Actions must be bound to inputs such as gamepad or keyboard. That's the whole goal of the crate. So I'm not surprised to see that that is here. While input contexts are defined statically at compile time, bindings must be assigned at runtime. They're stored inside the actions component where C is the input context. So there are actions per context. Again, going back to like, if Bevy Tenua wants to store that information, how do you sync between those two? Because if the actions are based on a context, you need to trigger that whenever it changes. Contexts become active only when its component exists. So existence is the control. And you can attach multiple actions components to a single entity. So if we have multiple contexts that our character is going to be in, like it's going to be in a car or on foot or whatever, in a plane, whatever, we can It sounds like we can just throw them all on there, and because they have type arguments, that says to me that they are different types, which means that they can all go onto the character in combination, right? Like if this was just actions and it didn't have a type argument, that would mean that there could only be one of them on the player character. But because it has the type argument, that makes it a distinct type, and thus we could potentially have multiple of them on the player character. Is it possible to programmatically generate like sprites and textures in Bevy and runtime based on game state? Yes, it is. There's examples in the Bevy repo. I'll let you find them yourself. How to develop specific screen when you have many screens or states? Probably use game states. Again, also examples in the Bevy repo for that. I'll let you do that too. Do you need to go through all the screen orders every time you test? Testing is something that I find that a lot of people don't do. So it's up to you. You can write code-driven tests. That is totally a possible thing. So you could write tests that would then do things in your application and take screenshots of those pages. That is totally a thing that you could do. But I find that a lot of people writing games don't write tests. So the answer would be, if you were going to change something deep in a menu and you're not going to write tests, then the only way to figure out whether that changed is to like run it and make sure it works. So my advice would be write tests for things that are hard to like manually do. The tests in the workshops that I work on like Mondays are always for like the win state. Like 2048's win state is annoying to get to, like really annoying. Not from the like perspective of like the game is annoying, but annoying from the perspective of, okay, I've changed something. Can you even still win the game? So I have a test for that state. If you can get it to the end state and it's a winning condition, then you have won the game, like that kind of thing. Which makes it much easier to know if you can end the game at all without requiring me to like hit 1,000 arrow key inputs. Binding actions. Okay, so actions on foot default, actions bind jump to. So let's just throw this in here. I'm gonna go with keyboard input for now, I think. We're gonna need a system. So maybe we just do something really silly. And we just like run a startup system, and then we figure out where this is supposed to go later. Right? Because this code, to me, very clearly needs to be run inside of some context, right? I'm not just gonna like throw this randomly in a file. So very likely this happens whenever we're setting up the inputs for the character, which is probably actually somewhere else. So in this case, we're going to bind jump, probably because these are all loose, like these are loose components, so to speak. I'm going to want to keep them all in the same file. So I think, whereas with Bevy or Leafwing Input Manager, it was very much like, let's see, do I still have that code sitting around? I think I just commented it out. We have player spawn logic. And in the player spawn logic, like this input map is basically just like one giant thing chained together. So throwing it into this other system made sense at the time. But that's because action is an enum in Leafwing Input Manager. It's not an enum in Bevy Enhanced Input, which means like move and hand tilt and everything are just like loose components, which means that they aren't contained by anything, which means that putting them in a module could be useful. Yeah. Bevy is interesting. Any extensive video course on Bevy? There's no extensive video course on Bevy that exists. I think of the people working on Bevy educational content, I think I maintain some of the most, especially when it comes to video. Having an extensive Bevy course is a very large ask. Hey, looking at your channel recently, very interesting. You made a boys application in Bevy, but you used Bevy 0.12 because of university. Could it still be interesting for your videos? You mean like for code review or... there's Boyd stuff in WGPU and whatnot that is very, like, mostly where I would go if I was going to do Boyd stuff. Oh, mostly for This Week in Bevy? Yeah, if you made something, it can go in This Week in Bevy for sure. I would say that if you made something with Bevy, do you have Discord? Are you a Discord user? If you are, go to the Bevy Discord and post it in the Showcase channel. I try to encourage people to like post to their own social media and then tell me about it rather than sending it directly to me, because that gets you like the reputation of having posted things goes to you when you post it. And then I can talk about what you posted rather than sending it to me. And then I post it and then you don't get like the reputation gain from having made something and posted it on the internet, if that makes sense. So I would say if you're a Discord user, post it in the Showcase channel in the Bevy Discord, and it will get into This Week in Bevy for sure. If you're like a Blue Sky user or something like that, post it to Blue Sky. I think the Bevy Showcase channel is probably where a lot of Bevy users look. So it's a great opportunity. If you're looking to like show it to a wider audience, other social networks make sense. But yeah, that's my general stance is like post it somewhere so that you get credit for having posted it, right? Like if your thing is good and you post it, then I can push people to your thing. People will follow you on that platform. And then when you make more stuff in the future, those people that liked your stuff see your new stuff, right? Like that's a really good ecosystem effect. So yeah, that's what I would say. If you want it to show up in This Week in Bevy, post it somewhere. Yeah, you struggle with that too. I forget what we were talking about when you were saying that you struggled with that too. Oh, the keeping content up to date. Was like you were trying to create content? Oh, learning Bevy on YouTube. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, keeping content up to date. Bevy changes. I guess it's like every 4 months right now. I think about this a lot for Rust Adventure stuff. I've got 5 Bevy workshops right now. I have to update them all to 0.16, so it's been on my mind a lot lately. If those are long workshops, the time calculation is like, if it takes me 2 weeks to update those 5 workshops, right? Which is totally random number. It doesn't really correlate to anything. But if it takes like 2 weeks, so like each one takes 2 days or something like that, you know, which is not true. It takes longer. Then you get 2 weeks taken out of every 4 months. So it's a month and a half's worth of work a year. When you start thinking about that, you start thinking about, okay, I'm spending a 1/12 of my year or more on just maintaining these Bevy workshops. And I think that's what makes it difficult for people, especially when it comes to video. Is that, first of all, they don't think about it like that. So they just start making stuff and then they get overwhelmed and then they can't keep it up to date because like making stuff for the first time is easy. Maintaining stuff over a long period of time in multiple releases gets actually harder. 0.16 is mostly just error handling, right? I wouldn't say that. I assume you looked at the release notes or watched the video. If you haven't looked at the release notes or watched the video, there's a video on my channel for Bevy 0.16. It'll tell you what's in. There's a bunch of rendering improvements. For me, decals, huge. Relationships are new. Relationships are amazing. The spawn API improvement, that's a video from yesterday that I did, if you want to check that out. Spawning hierarchies of stuff, way easier. Like if you've ever looked at Bevy UI and gone, oh wow, my spawning logic for all my UI really feels terrible to me. This is going to fix that for a lot of stuff. Error handling, obviously huge. And then no standard support, in my opinion, also very big. Like, no standard support is wild. To have an entire engine that has no standard support is wild. And then like the GPU driven rendering stuff is also huge, honestly. It's just like, it's harder to talk about because it's kind of just like, oh, performance got better. But like the idea that performance got better and most people don't need to change anything about their app to gain that performance improvement is so cool. And like a lot of work went into this. It's just like, it's not flashy in terms of visuals, but it's very good, cool work and very useful. Oh, you hated UI. You meant like you had to change the code because everything else is just adding on to. Even error handling is adding on to. Unless you were previously using never param warn got deprecated. You don't even need to use the error handling. I'm a Bevy Diamond supporter. Yes, I am. I basically give them the ad revenue from my YouTube every month. And since we're bringing that up, if anybody else wants to donate, you can join me in supporting Bevy by clicking on the donate button, which is great. And you can have your name somewhere on here. And it helps the project quite a bit. Yeah, so like error handling, unless you were already doing something, like unless you integrated like a third-party crate and decided to do something weird or whatnot, like you can change your code to take advantage of the new error handling, but you don't have to, right? Like if you're unwrapping everywhere right now, you can still unwrap everywhere in 0.16. It's not like nobody's going to stop you from doing that, etc. Like it's probably a good idea to update, but you don't have to, you know? Okay. So cool thing here, binding jump. We can bind to multiple kinds of input at the same time. So this is a tuple because these are different types. So we've got a key code in the first slot, gamepad in the second, which is just cool. Actions know nothing about input sources and simply convert raw values into input action outputs. Input is read as the action value, enum. Variant depending on the input source. So, for example, key inputs are captured as bool. This is a really interesting statement to me because, like, the keyboard that I play games on, or the keyboards, I guess, that I play games on, because I have multiple, have variable input. So, like, it doesn't really matter at this point. It would only matter in the far future if I wanted to support something like that. But it's interesting that they're like key inputs are captured as bool, because today, if you have like Hall effect sensors and stuff, you can end up with variable input, which is also interesting. How can someone become more involved in the project and supporting it while still being pretty new to the project? Contributing, donating, etc. is great. What are some other things we can do to help? Code review, PR review, absolutely, 100%. The number one thing I would tell new people to do is there are more people writing code than there are reviewing code. So even something as simple as going to Bevy, clicking on pull requests, or if you're kind of like a I don't want to work on stale things person, go to this week in Bevy and go all the way down to the pull requests that were open this week, which is effectively the same list, and look through this and go, is there anything I'm even interested in here, right? So here, Bevy reflect split up the standard module, right? This splits up a bunch of code. There's no functional changes here, so everything should work the same way as it did before, right? So if you were going to review this, if you were going to do something, you could click on this and you could review all the code. Or another thing you could do is there's a bunch of reflection examples in the Bevy examples. Just run them all, right? Any example that you see with reflection, just go run the example on this PR and go, hey, all of this worked on my machine. I was using a Mac and whatever, right? That is useful. Yeah, there is no committee. There's no like PR review committee. There's no like only these people can do review. Anybody can do review. Anybody can do PR review. And I would heavily suggest doing so. Thank you, Izumi. Appreciate that. Thanks for introducing Bevy to me. I'll deep dive into it later. It's interesting to have code-oriented game engine and they use Rust. Used it a lot in B. Nice. Oh, I'm glad you're enjoying stuff. Let me know if you have any questions, obviously. Hey, sorry to ask a different question, but what is the minimum Blender version for Skein? I have tested down to 4.2. I don't know if it works before that. I haven't tested. I haven't had anybody ask me to test either. But when I started working with it, it was 4.2. I recently had to use 4.2 for something else. I was doing some light baking. So I was doing some light baking. I was using the light mapper. And being who I am, I didn't use the actual release. I used the in development branch of the next version. And I needed to use 4.2 for this to work because that was the thing it was developed against. So I know that Skein works in 4.2. I know that it works in 4.4 because that's what I'm currently working on, or that's what I'm currently using for other applications. So yeah, we don't have any regression tests for Blender versions in CR right now, but it should at least work 4.2, 4.3, 4.4. And we don't do anything too weird in the extension. So I would say hesitantly that anything that was a Blender version that was released after the extensions release of Blender should work. Do you have a specific Blender version that you need to work? Is another question that I have. Because I'm totally open to like testing more versions of Blender. Yeah, so back on the PR thing, like there's no committee, right? There's no like the way these get merged. Hopefully I'm not going to get the actual it's a little bit loose. So I would say that if there are 2 community reviews, then something will generally get merged, right? You can see people giving reviews, like Hukasu, often in chat, actually. I don't know if they are right now or not. But they give reviews, and this is the same way that my reviews show up, right? Like they don't have any special, you know, hey, I'm like a maintainer level person or whatever. You can get into this by so there's a couple of like groups, right? There's people who are not associated with Bevy at all and just want to do some review, and they can totally do that, and you can improve stuff and be like, hey, this worked. That's all super useful. After doing that for a little bit, you can actually get pulled into like a Bevy team group that gives you a little bit more responsibility. So you get access to actually putting labels on stuff. So I've done enough stuff in the ecosystem that I have access to labels. I'm not going to click it because I don't want to change anything. But like if there was something here that was like ready for final merge, I could mark it as ready for final merge if it had 2 reviews, right? There's a whole contributing doc that goes over this. But the whole process, all of it, community driven. Absolutely community driven, right? Like if there was something that I wanted to merge, if there was something that like I wanted to make sure got in, like this when maybe I forget exactly what this was. This was run a system if a resource is missing, because the never param warn stuff got removed. If I really wanted to see this merged, I would put a review on it. Currently, it looks like it's waiting on author. It has plenty of reviews, plenty of discussion. So we're waiting for the author to do something. That's what that means. So there's really nothing for me to do on this PR. If I cared a lot about naming conventions, right? If I had been using Bevy for a little bit and I was like, oh yeah, it makes it more understandable for me as either an experienced user or a beginner to see things in this way, then just contribute to the review process, right? But yeah, I would say review, review, because especially as a beginner, that's a great way to upskill into different areas too. You were using 4.0, but you'll upgrade to 4.4. Thanks for the answer though. Yeah. I actually don't know if it would work on 4.0. I think it would, but I'm not sure because I haven't tried it. At some point, I'll implement like Blender version testing in CI, but I just haven't set that up yet. WASM time with WASX interfaces would also let them use non-Rust too. Anything that can compile to WASX. From the modding conversation earlier? Yeah. Well, anything that can compile to WASM can run in WASM time too, right? So like... yeah. A lot of conversation. Input modifiers. So let's look at the code example. So if we bind move to a bunch of stuff, looks like there might be some special special enums and stuff for dealing with it. Keycode W with modifiers swizzle access YXZ. You need to assign keys to axes using swizzle to reorder them in negation. Oh, so this is... Okay. So this is saying that keycode W, which comes in as a Boolean, needs to be applied in a specific way. I think this example isn't quite... isn't quite that readable. We've got some dead zones and stuff, which is cool. Let's go find out what swizzle axis is, because swizzle axis is a little bit confusing to me. I kind of get, I think, what it's trying to do, right? But I don't quite understand why it's like this, why it's a three-dimensional thing, if it's trying to... Missing axes are replaced with 0. Okay. That's good. So theoretically, if we have a bool, then we just kind of have to know that the first axis is the one that the key is corresponding to. So in this example, key W with modifiers, W is a y-axis application. I wish that enum was just named like Y or something. But YXZ is fine, because we'll get effectively like 1, 0, 0 all the time, or 0, 0, 0 or something like that. I wonder what the default is. Is the default XYZ? The default is XZY maybe? For example, action value bool will remain unchanged for self XZY. But for variants like YXZ, where X becomes the second component, it will be converted into an action value axis 2D with Y set to the value. That feels really weird. So do you just have to know that this is going to go into the X by default? So XYZ? Is there a default here? There is no default. Not on swizzle axis anyway. Useful for binding 1D inputs to the y-axis for 2D action. I feel like this is a really confusing enum. I feel like reading this or like having somebody else read it, they're not really going to be able to tell what's actually happening. And I get that it's supposed to be pretty generic, so like W needs to be mappable to any of the other dimensions. And I would assume that with modifiers then means that it needs to... What does negate return? Negate all returns a negate. So with modifiers, what is with modifiers then? It must like accept a trait of some kind? Action binding with modifiers? Into modifiers. So these are things that build modifiers. So theoretically, we could create our own enum if I thought there was a better like modifier pattern for naming these things. And we could just implement into modifier for it. So absolutely unconcerned about the naming conventions here. Probably not going to do that because I don't like the idea of separating from the base behavior. This is the input modifier trait. And it's a preprocessor that alters the raw input values. That's what we were seeing. Gets an action map, a time, and a value. And there's a number of them. So swizzle axis is one that we saw. Clamp, dead zone, we've seen. Delta scale and exponential curve are really interesting. I feel like exponential is something that controller players use sometimes. Like if you're playing, say, Fortnite, you might set your input method to exponential rather than linear for your dual axis controls. So it's cool that that's just kind of like built in here. Negate, scale, smooth nudge. Smooth nudge is smoothing over frames. A smooth value of the current and the previous input value. So yeah, I think juggling some of these like almost implicit type conversions is a little bit weird because I think that just reading this and having read the docs just now, it's like key W with modifier swizzle axis YXZ, right? So theoretically, anything that I put in the first slot is where that's going to go. So key S, all keys are like 0 or 1, right? Boolean, false or true, whether they're pressed down or not. So it's all the same. So then we need to modify it. So W needs to be positive Y direction, and then XZ turns into 0. S needs to be negated and then also applied to Y. I feel like I almost want this to just be like a little closure. But we're not going to change anything right now. We're just going to stick with the way that they want us to do it. I'm going to gain a little bit of experience having used it that way, and then we'll see what happens after that. In Bevy, sticks split by axis and are captured as one-dimensional inputs. Yep. Stick X, stick Y. I feel like I want them to provide gamepad axis XY so that I don't have to keep adding these modifiers. But again, we're just gonna roll with it. This is the bindings for moving, which I think is fine. All this documentation basically just says exactly what we went over. Oh, there are presets. Okay, some bindings are very common. It would be very inconvenient to bind WASD and sticks, like in the example above. I really want this to be moved up a paragraph. You're not in the actual docs themselves right now, but does bind overwrite the existing binds or append to them? Thinking about the flow for user rebinds. I don't know yet. Binding is done at runtime. We do know that. So theoretically, you could rebind anything at runtime because the binding is done at runtime. I don't know. Like, I know that like games like Fortnite have multiple potential buttons. Like Fortnite will let you bind 2 buttons to the same like action per context. So it feels like this would support that. Especially since it's very much like actions bind to. Where's the bit about runtime versus static? I think the actions have to be compile time and the bindings are runtime, is if I remember correctly. Yeah, input contexts are defined statically at compile time. So like in a car, on foot, running, or not running, but like running and et cetera, right? So what your character is capable of doing, I guess. I assume that you could make an input context that was sufficiently generic if you really wanted to, but let's keep it to like specifics. If you were going to have in car and whatever, those need to be defined at compile time, but the bindings for the actions can be assigned at runtime. So you should be able to rebind anything, is my understanding. I don't know if the actual, like, if you always need to do it like this, or if you can do like append binding or something. I probably wouldn't want append binding if I'm being honest. I feel like this is something where if somebody rebound, I would want to save that out into a file, read that back in, and then just do the whole thing at once. But you can definitely have multiple bindings. So if you want to like allow people to use 2 keyboard inputs, you can totally do that. Tuple both keyboard and game input. Yeah. So like this is just all of the things that will cause you to jump. So this is actually what we want. This is like WASD, axial left stick. This is generally speaking like my desired code. So it's nice that they have the lower level layer that you can do whatever you want with, and the higher level layer. The higher level layer for somebody who's just going through this for effectively the first time, love having this. Probably what I'll use for most WASD implementations. But I could see wanting to do other things. Yeah, the contexts are a finite state machine. Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, actually. We were talking about like Bevy enhanced input seems to want to own that state machine. And then if you work with something like Bevy Tenua, the character controller, that also wants to own that state machine. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to figure out if those two things end up fighting or if they can actually be combined. I don't know that we're going to go back and use Tenua, or if we're going to write our own character controller moving forward, but it is an interesting thing. There's a couple of ways that I think the current game that we're upgrading right now could go. We could keep working on it until the Bevy Game Jam, and then consider it done at the Bevy Game Jam and start a new project. Or we could do something else. We could also just keep working on this game for the next 4 months too. There's a bunch of new stuff, etc. Okay. Instead of hard-coded states like pressed and released, all actions internally have a state that depends on the input conditions, which decide when the action triggers. This allows to define flexible conditions like hold for 1 second. Sweet. That's cool. This seems very cool, actually. I wonder how to do that in a variable way. Like if you had a power up that let you jump faster. I guess you would just rebind it, right? Which seems simple enough. Because if you rebind it, then that just solves everything and you don't need to worry about having another API for it. You can also attach conditions to input tuples using with conditions each. It doesn't seem like there's any docs on that, so I think we'll just skip that for now. So theoretically, there's a with conditions for potentially key chords and stuff. I don't know if that's how we would do this, but like if you did, oh, I guess maybe this is just saying that if we had multiple, we could do this on the tuple as well. Not super important for us right now, so I'm just going to skip it, but interesting that there's conditions. Organizing bindings. It's convenient to define them in a single function that you use every time to activate the context to reload your application settings. This does seem to be the way that everything is set up, right? When we were talking about rebinding, it does seem that we would want to just have that function and throw down that whole function anytime we do a rebind. Instead of doing like incremental, like insert this binding here or whatnot. You've made a couple of tutorials, but you don't know if you have the right to do it because you're still pretty new. I don't, like, you have the right to do it, first of all. Let's start there. You definitely absolutely have the right to do it. Right? Like there's nothing wrong with I learned something and I'm going to share it with somebody else. That is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't matter what level you're at. Right? It doesn't matter how experienced you are with Bevy. I think as long as you frame the tutorials as like, this is my understanding at this given time, right? Here's how I learned how to do this, you know? Leave some leeway for like, this is how I think it's best to do this currently, but you know, like just don't talk about things like they are absolute facts is really the end thing of that, right? Like don't be like, the only way you can bind things is if you name your thing jump and then use specifically a single element here, or, you know, like that kind of thing. As long as you don't like approach things as more authoritative than you feel about them, then things are fine. And I would love to see more people doing Bevy tutorials. I would love to see more Bevy content out there. The way that I think about it is that no matter where you are in your journey for learning something, in this case, Bevy, there's always somebody or a group of people who are just before you in that step. And if you put out something that you just learned, then everybody that's just behind you can use your thing to get to where you are. And that's a really good thing, right? So, yes, you absolutely have the right to do that. It does not matter how experienced you are. Okay, organizing bindings. We have a special binding event that triggers when you insert or replace an actions component. Create an observer and define all your bindings there. Ooh. So they actually provide like explicit support for setting up bindings. So theoretically, that function that we were talking about that does the setup can just be this observer, and then these events fire and set them. So we never really need to worry about setting up the bindings because we can just read from our resources in this system, or observer, sorry. I think of everything as a system. And then we could like read from a resource or whatever. And as long as those things are up to date, then all of the bindings get set up. I love this. I wish this was like right at the top. App settings, keyboard settings, jump key code. Yeah, so they have a couple of structs here for bindings and stuff. Maybe we keep this. I don't really have any problem with it existing. There's a user triggerable rebuild bindings event that resets bindings for all inserted actions and triggers the binding for them. So that's sick. So what we were talking about before is like what happens when you want to rebind stuff. And in this case, we do commands.trigger rebuild bindings. And as long as we have that observer defined, this will trigger that observer and rebind using whatever resources you want. I really like that. Add observer. My files are all messed up because I have so many comments in them from the 0.16 upgrade. Okay, so we have, let's not do this startup then, right? Let's do everything inside of this observer, which means jump settings.keyboard.jump. I think putting these in the struct early makes sense to me if we ever want to show a rebinding menu. So doing that from the beginning feels like a good pattern. I don't know if this is really going to be app settings for us or not. I don't know if I like having one giant glob of app settings. So this is really, let's start off calling this keybind settings, just to scope it down a little bit. And then if we wanted to, we could always put this back into like an app settings. So keyboard would be keyboard settings, and this is settings keyboard jump. Jump is a key code. We haven't inserted this resource at all, so we do need to do that. The way this struct is set up means that we can only ever have one key code per. So maybe in the future we end up with like, this is a vec. I assume that we can call 2 multiple times. That's actually an interesting... We wouldn't want it to be a vec though, right? So maybe we would make it a two element tuple or something like that. What is bind.to? Let's look for 2 and look at the function signature for 2. Function signature for 2 uses impl into bindings. So we could go something in that direction, and then we could just take those out and put them in place. We would still need, unless everything was driven from that one struct, like in the, like, I'm thinking about if we have like a hard-coded escape is always something, right? Oh, you were literally just wondering about modifier keys. It's a monad. Shh, you'll scare the non-monad people. Talk about burritos or something. Reacting on action. Okay, so I'm pretty I'm feeling pretty good about the way that this is building up. We don't need this startup anymore. Did actions get mute trigger? Actions on foot default. So the question here is, we have this observer. Do we need to have any other function? Or is this enough to put onto our player or whatnot? I'm thinking that this is what we're going to put on our player. We're going to have an on-foot context. When that on-foot context is kind of attached to the player, I assume that it will fire this binding. I don't know that it will yet. Which will fire these bindings and then hopefully like get the actions for that context from the player, attach the bindings, and then we'll be able to play. For stuff like escape always works, you just put it in a separate context and only do user bindings for some contexts, right? Well, it depends, right? Because if you want escape always works in all contexts, then you could put it in every context. But my thought was actually much more locally scoped. And if jump was an array, how would we write this? Right? If jump was an array, right, how do we know how many options are here to like do this? Right? Because we have one hard-coded thing here, and this kind of accepts a tuple. Maybe it accepts an array of intos. That's why I was looking at the function signature earlier. It looks like anything that goes impl into bindings. So we could theoretically just have that vec if vecs work, but vecs don't work for key code and gamepad button. So it would have to be like a vec of boxed into bindings. When I saw that, and that my head got to that place, and I went, "That's for later." That is a future problem that we may never have. So we're just going to stick for the single key code right now. I believe that we would be able to, implement into bindings for whatever we wanted here. Regardless, like it's a trait, we could implement the trait. It shouldn't be a problem no matter what we want to do in the future. I just thought it was interesting that this is dynamic. This is like user config, and this is like controller config that is hard coded. When in my head, actually, gamepad configuration is like important for accessibility if we're going to do it. So like I wouldn't want just keyboard settings here. I would also want gamepad settings. Right? And then this is basically the same thing. And these like both need to line up, right? Or they don't technically need to line up, but so like jump, and this is gamepad button. Is that what we're using today? Yeah. So these two things. And then they also need to be like set up, right? So insert these two things. Insert resource. Autocomplete? Yeah, autocomplete. Autocomplete? No, yeah, autocomplete. So for jump, we'll do key code space. Is that what we're calling it? Yeah, space. And then gamepad button south. Get my syntax right. Why does that not work? Because it's not defined as a resource? Is that why? Oh, because I need to do the keybind settings. Because it's actually this. Which still looks wrong because I need at least one more curly bracket. Okay, and then the startup system goes away because all the bindings are handled. It's really unfortunate that I've effectively broken Rust Analyzer with how many comments and stuff that I have. So that's a me problem to deal with later. We'll end up getting rid of probably all of this stuff. I think we can just get rid of a bunch of it, but I'm gonna leave it for the moment. Okay, so we've got bindings, we've got like triggerable rebinding, so we could theoretically build a menu using, I think building, how do I say this? Building controller rebinds could be a good exercise of the new hierarchy spawning stuff. Oh yeah, you can handle escape or whatever outside of enhancements, but you definitely could do that. Absolutely. I feel like I wouldn't want to, but TBD. I feel like having an input context pause menu would make a lot more sense. Okay, we've defined actions and haven't reacted, push style and pull style. So we can use observers to react, or we can check components. You thought you could activate more than one context at a time. So you could make a context called always and slap it on everything, but maybe that's annoying. You might be able to. I just haven't gotten there yet. So we've got push and pull style. In the past, we've used kind of more of a pull style, so to speak, checking to see if a particular trigger was enabled. I wonder. It's recommended to always use the observer API when possible. Don't worry about parallelism. Running a system has its own overhead, so for small logic, it's actually faster to execute it outside of a system. Just avoid heavy logic in action observers. Don't call an HTTP server in your character controller. So, after each cycle, a new action state is created and triggered events based on a state transition, including transitions between identical states. There's some documentation about transitions and event types. I don't think that we really need to read this. Ongoing, fired, none. So that's nice. It's nice to have this table. I don't know that we really need the table right now, but it's nice to have the table. Don't put a Pope in his head. Don't block playing the B movie until it ends. That's the new achievement in my game. You have to watch the B movie, but it speeds up every time they say the word B. And you have to watch the whole movie. And then you get the Steam achievement. Cool. So triggered events are stored as action events in a bit set, but triggered using dedicated types that correspond to bit flags. Started, whatever. Trigger target is the entity with the actions component, so like our player character. And the output will match the output. So move is going to be a vec2. Jump is going to be a bool. Events also store other information such as timings. One of the reasons that I think building a character controller could be interesting is if Bevy enhanced input is actually going to be the thing that eventually gets upstreamed, then knowing how to work with the API in depth is going to be very useful. So building a character controller, doing things like collide and slide, etc., feels like a really good way to deeply use Bevy enhanced input without worrying about other things. I think that's probably not what I would do for the Bevy Game Jam, but we'll see. An input handler does feel like something that should be a dependency of a character controller rather than the other way around, rather than the character controller being a dependency of the input. Yeah, I think that on some level, I'm starting to see how it might integrate with something like this is all jumbled because it's commented out. I'm beginning to see how it might integrate with something like Bevy Chinua. Because we can do pull based, and then we can do all the checks, and then we can feed stuff into Chinua. But the whole like input context thing versus basis still feels a little bit awkward. Dependency injection. That's the answer to everything, right? Just inject more dependencies. Okay, so for the moment, one thing that I find interesting is they're saying use observers, right? So I think we need to distance ourselves from the input handling anyway, right? Because if we use observers, observers should be setting, say, like the velocity, right? And that should be the thing that's applying the actual movement. Because that'll happen in like fixed update. That's one of the things that I feel in my bones that doing input collection outside of like fixed update is the right thing. So do all of the input collection, make sure it happens as fast as possible, whatever, use a buffer or whatever. And then fixed update is for like game logic, right? So whatever those buffers say to do in the fixed update is what happens in the fixed update. So you end up with input constantly firing, right? As fast as it can, more or less. Applying changes in fixed update, modifying physics, things like that, which then gets interpolated into the game. And I think that is the right balance of stuff. So I think the observer is fine. I think this is a system, right? No, this is an observer. They're doing movement in an observer. And movement in the observer feels a little weird. I guess I would have to know when this was triggering, right? If this triggers in fixed update or something, then there's no problem. After each input processing cycle, it doesn't tell me when this fires. So I'm curious. So I want to go check the repo, actually. So there's a decent amount of code here. I've never looked at the code before. So this is my first look at the code base. Source is like I habitually clicked into source. There's some other things. There's examples and tests and whatever. But the thing that I'm looking for is very likely going to be in source. The events might be related. Events are a bit set, like they said. I think I want to look for the plugin wherever their plugin is, because that feels like the entry point. This is all the documentation. Enhanced input plugin. We get the context registry, reset input, action sources, and configure sets. So in pre-update, the input system happens after, I guess, Bevy's input system. Yeah. So that's in pre-update, which pre-update. Come on, main schedule. There we go, main schedule. So this is pre-update. Fixed main runs in the frame after pre-update. So that matches the mental model that I had earlier, where we're going to do all of our observer-based input handling here or here. They mentioned state transition. I don't know if they mean state transition like the schedule or state transition like the internal concept. Right? Where's the documentation? Here's the documentation. Reacting to actions. Push and pull. Always use observers when possible. Based on state transition, but I think that's internal state transition. I don't think that's Bevy's state transition. We don't know. I haven't looked at it yet, but that's my guess. So events are triggered, I would assume, immediately in pre-update. But it doesn't seem to say particularly. Input and UI doesn't have focus management. Oh, Bevy does have some focus management now. It doesn't really have navigation APIs, yeah. Action sources, so they do suggest kind of like integrating with UI, semi. There's some logging we can enable, which is cool. We might do that in a second. Yeah, states between the internal FSM. I think that's true too. That would make the most sense for me, especially since I don't think that the Bevy states mechanism is meant for this. right? I don't think so. The people working on this know more about input than I do, and probably know more about Bevy than I do, because it's like Alice, right? So they could have made a decision that doesn't seem intuitive to me, but makes sense because they have deeper knowledge than I do. That's the only like qualification on like why I think that and why this is my guess. Okay, so we got the context registry, got the setup. So we're running input in pre-update. Avian has some fixed update documentation, I think. Where's the best fixed update documentation? Contains gameplay logic, yada yada. Physics, AI, networking, game rules. So I do feel like we're going to be using the input to drive like velocity values that are then applied in physics. The thing about like, hey, you should use observers when possible feels a little bit confusing. Hey, yeah, nice work on Skein. I'm glad you're enjoying it. It looks to me like the actual input events are set up by input context, and the one that allows you to specify a schedule, which is presumably the schedule that the input events are sent. You think that the... Sorry, I have too many tabs open here now. You think that the input context... Let's look at the docs. Input context. Add input context. Schedule. Schedule in which the context will be evaluated. Associated type defaults are not stable in Rust yet, but the macro uses pre-update by default. Set this to fixed pre-update if game logic relies on actions. I think we need to change this. I think we need our observers to run in fixed pre-update. Been fighting a bit with it to get Vex things to work, but it's so convenient compared to my own map format I had previously. Nice. Yeah, we looked at Vex for a second. I think that the thing about Vex is Vex are homogeneous. So if you do a Vec for like a key code, you can't put a gamepad button inside of that Vec. So you have to do like a Vex or a Vec box, Dyn impl, or sorry, not Dyn impl, Dyn, dang, I forget the thing. Not into modifier, into button or something. I forget what it is. It's in the two, into bindings. So like a box 9 into bindings or something for the Vec. But yeah, we skipped that for now because I don't really need Vex of stuff. So I think we want to change this. I know that for the physics-based controller that we were using, we did use the fixed update schedule for all of our stuff. Now you think about it, why not 2 Vex? Assuming that keyboards and gamepads are the only things, then yeah, I guess that would work. Oh, arrays are not implemented all in the Blender add-on. Oh, you mean vex of things in Skein. In Skein. Yeah. Sorry, we're talking about input stuff here, so I thought that you were yeah. Sorry. I was in the wrong context. Arrays of stuff are not implemented in Skein currently. What is your use case for arrays of stuff? The issue with arrays of stuff for Skein is actually that the UI isn't clear. Like the user experience of adding arrays of stuff isn't clear, and the way that we implement it isn't clear. So I'm looking for use cases basically. Like I haven't really had anybody be like, "Oh, I needed a vec of stuff." Xavier, you're not wrong that often. Player spawner having a vec of conditions. A vec of conditions. Could you put your use case in the Skein channel in the Bevy Discord, and I'll look at it later? I do need the use case for because like all of the stuff that I've seen that has used arrays hasn't really been user serviceable. It's been a bunch of stuff that like is stuff you would never manually set. So right now what happens if you use things that are required to be arrays is you get an empty array. Which is fine for most things, because for most things you actually don't want to set any values anyway. You accept the company no issue. But yeah, if you could put the use case in the Skein channel, it's in the ecosystem creates like sub channel of the Bevy Discord. That would be really useful because I'm looking for people who have like a need for vecs of stuff. And if you have one, that's really useful for me because then I can start building array functionality based on that use case. The other thing is that if we do arrays can theoretically be arbitrarily nested inside of structs. So it's not that big of a deal, but it does add some extra complexity. So yeah. So we add input context on foot, right? Add input context. This doesn't have the schedule information. So where was the schedule information? I'm hitting the point of tab overload, if you can't tell. Input context. We're deriving it here. Schedule. Oh, they have an example. So we'll get rid of priority because I don't know what priority does. What does priority do? Evaluation order used to control how contexts are layered. So yeah, you can do multiple contexts because otherwise layering wouldn't be useful. So that's on our context. We don't need the priority at this moment. So we will need this, right? Because if we're going to do any kind of physics-based controller, we're going to want to do that logic in response to those observers inside of fixed pre-update. If they are telling us to use observers, then we have to put this inside of that spot. And then observers should just work. Yeah, I saw that error message. Tried to dig through the Blender add-on source code to find it and could not find that. Did find a few other silly error messages that gave you a chuckle though. Yeah. The whatchamacallit, the working with Python and Blender is definitely one of those. Write a bunch of tests, because if you don't write a bunch of tests, you're never going to know how this works and never be able to modify it. You guess the existence of priorities and layers means you can do mutually exclusive contexts. That, or if two contexts share a bind, the higher priority takes it. Yeah, let's look into that. Let's see what layering is about. So input context, right? Used to differentiate actions components and configure how associated actions will be evaluated. All need to be registered. You need to implement the trait. We'll get a priority and a schedule. This doesn't have context about layering. There's going to be no layer. There's going to be no priority. This is just the value. I don't think there's going to be anything else here in the docs and the source code. Okay, some input actions may consume inputs. So if input actions are consumed, then they won't be forwarded. That is my understanding of that. So like for jumping, let's say jumping was super high priority and the only thing you want somebody to be able to do if they are able to jump is jump. You don't want them to like attack, which is like, I think, well, Hades has dash, not whatever. But like if your jump and your attack were the same, and you could only attack in the air, right? Something like that. I don't know. Then you would want to consume that jump. I don't see anything about consuming. I think at this point we might be getting into examples territory. Bevy, let's do the direct link. Repository, examples, context layering, perfect. So now we've read the docs. Again, this is like our first run through. We've read the docs. We understand what's going on. We know a lot about the input and bindings and runtime and compile time and etc. We've put our things in the right spot to be able to drive a physics-based character controller. And now we have a question about context layering. There's an example in the repo that shows context layering. Yeah, bpy looks painful. Yeah. It's not great. It's very worth the effort. I think having Skein is great. It's really useful as a tool. But bpy and that environment is not my favorite to work in. Classic talks moment. Yeah, immediate thought would be like in a pause menu, you'd have every input be consumed so they don't go down to the simulation layers. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Talk to NPC could consume key press if it's the same button as jump, so you don't jump at the start of every conversation. What, you don't want to jump at the start of every conversation? You know what would be better? If you attacked at the start of every conversation. You ever done that before? I want to talk to this NPC. Chop. Well, guess I'm not talking to the NPC. Okay, actions, player default. This is just some like player box thing. Regular binding. No, GitHub, please don't pop up random stuff. Trigger player binding. So this is the bindings for the player. That's move, cardinal, WASD, dead zone, smooth nudge. Scale is interesting. We haven't seen scale yet. I mean, we've seen scale like abstractly, like we saw scale, but we haven't seen it used. Rotate, enter water, both interesting. There's a new context, swimming binding. Maybe it would be good to just run this. I know that for me, I think I get it from just reading the code, but for the sanity of stream, I think I'm going to pull this down and run it. This is Project Harmonia, right? I think I have Project Harmonia. Nope, I guess I don't. Project Harmonia. Is there a dash? No dash. I'm going to do GH repo clone, Project Harmonia, Bevy enhanced input. You've met people who do that. Recursive conversations. Let's get into this. Cargo run, example, context layering. So we're just gonna let that compile and run. When making UI, if you have a home menu at the beginning, how do you manage the actual game? Like despawn and respawn things, or do you have the actual game and overlay and everything else? For UI, for a pause menu, I overlaid, in my opinion. If it's a pause menu, if it's a home menu, like a start menu, then nothing's spawned. I mean, like, it's an option, right? Like, let me frame it this way. I think for most games make you hit start game before they spawn stuff, right? And when you spawn stuff, you probably transition into a new state, like playing or something like that at a simple level. On enter playing, you spawn a bunch of stuff. Everything is state scoped, so if you change state transitions, everything gets removed. Things like that, right? So with the caveat that I could very easily see a game that pre-spawns the first level. Like you are always going to be starting here or whatever, and it's not that intensive to render or something like that. Like a mini golf game or something, right? And you just spawn that when the menu spawns as well. And then in the background of the actual menu is the actual game. Like that would be a cool effect too. So there's like no one true way to do it, right? Someone who actually uses GitHub CLI, dang. Yeah. Well, I used to use, I can't remember the name of it anymore. I was forced to move to the GH CLI. I liked the other one better. I liked the way the other one layered into the Git CLI. And then I could just use Git for everything. But I had to move to GH because the other one is deprecated. There's this great add-on for GLTF loading from a Blender scene called Skein. Thanks for the rotating ad banner. Okay, yeah, you're making a 2D factory game. It would be cool to have it running in the background. Yeah, so like, I mean, it's totally up to you, right? There's no, that's one of the things, like, when you start thinking about code review and stuff, the things that matter in, say, code review for, like, hey, I built an API, and hey, I built a game, start to be a little different. Especially like if you're building something for corporate reasons versus building something on your own versus building something as a product, like the code review changes, right? I think for a lot of people, they think about code review as like, oh, how do I make my code the best it can be? But realistically, code review is about sharing knowledge, not really achieving a gold standard of code, you know? Like the things that really matter in a code review are, can you communicate what is happening here to other people such that when other people in the future need to figure out what this is doing and why it's doing it, is that recorded somewhere, right? Corporate environments don't necessarily care about code quality. Corporate environments care a lot more, quite often, about getting things merged more than getting things to be maintainable, right? If you're building something for yourself, you may care a lot about the quality of the code and the maintainability of the code, right? Like for me, if I was doing code review on Skein or a PR to Skein, I would care a lot more about it being maintainable because it's my time in the future that I'm going to have to spend if it's not, right? And if I can't update it to future Bevy versions, then everybody is punished by that. So like code review is a lot of different things. An example off the dome for a game that rendered the world on the GNOME screen was New World. I don't know New World. I don't think I've ever seen New World. I bet if I search New World game, it's not going to show me, right? Is this New World, actually? New World home screen menu. Is that this? Closed beta. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Oh, maybe I can find the image that I wanted to look at. So much work just to look at the home menu. Yeah, so like this doesn't necessarily need to be the thing you're going to spawn into either, right? Yeah, like this could just be one of the landscapes spawned, right? It doesn't need to be all of the NPCs and all of the whatever. Like you totally could, but you know, etc. But like it's a per game thing, right? So like doing that or not doing that is like not really particularly a code review topic, you know? Tech guys care about quality of the commercials less. Management sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I mean, I without getting into like what specific groups want, I think there are different goals, right? There are different goals in different environments. If you're working a corporate job, your goal is not to make the best code you can, right? Like if you hold up a feature to make the code more maintainable, sometimes that is worse for the business than if you ship something that is low quality or not clean or like what however you want to phrase it, right? Um, and there is a method of development where if you ship things quickly, I'm not going to say move fast and break things. That's not what I mean, just to be clear. If you ship things quickly, where the code quality bar isn't necessarily as high as you would like, that can still be very useful to people. Feel free to skip if it's off topic, but are there any good resources for how to use Bevy Assets loading system? No. Making an editor with Tori and need to process lots of custom JSON. Unfortunately, the Bevy asset system is one of the things that um, is an underdocumented area and something that would benefit a lot from a new contributor just going through and documenting a whole bunch of stuff. The asset examples are obviously where I would point you. That's why I'm navigating to it on screen. There's a whole bunch of things in here, like making custom assets and whatnot. But yeah, I very often like no is not really the answer that I give quite often. But I do think that the asset system on a deeper level is something that benefits from more people getting into it. At the time that it launched, I almost think like Cart has a very good idea of how it was supposed to work and what it's supposed to do. And I think that if you were really going to get into the asset system, like you might have to go look at the assets V2 PR and understand what the motivations were, right? It'll be a while ago, I think. Bevy asset V2. GitHub hopefully one day will load a page. So like, why does Bevy Asset V2 exist? What is it supposed to do? The asset system, it turns out, is super complex for good reason. But that also means that like, as of the merging of this PR, like this is 168 files changed. This is a massive PR. 10K lines added, 5K removed. So plus 5K. It's a lot of code. It has taken a long time for people to like understand what's here, how to use it, what it should do. Even the documentation on this PR is very deep. So this is actually probably where I would start to understand what the asset system is meant to do. And then also the examples, which show you concretely how to do certain things in modern Bevy. This will not necessarily give you all of the information, though. I think it's absolutely an area that could benefit from new people coming in and like learning and writing about it. It's like one of those things where like we were talking earlier about somebody being a little bit newer and whether they had the right to write tutorials or not. If you got Bevy asset system stuff to work and you wrote about it and somebody turned that into documentation, that would be an extremely good thing. Custom JSON, though, probably doesn't need to be that complicated. Your use case is just custom JSON, right? So you actually don't need to write asset stuff. Because somebody else has already done this. If you go look at Bevy Common Assets has already written a JSON asset loader that you can use to load any kind of JSON. You set it up as a plugin, you give it your little, hey, this JSON is going to be loaded this way. It's like partially based on file extensions and whatnot. So like you're going to have to care about file names, but that happens anyway. Or you need to specify loaders when you're doing the actual loading. Like it really depends, but like this already exists, right? The ability to load JSON into a specific kind of struct already exists. You don't need to write it yourself. Also, fun fact of the day, you can add a max tuple of 15 plugins to a Bevy app. You can nest them. Don't forget that you can nest them. Nesting doesn't matter. You can also like just add another add plugins, whatever you feel like doing. Yeah, tea time, you can get around them by nesting. Yep, exactly. Got really bloody confused. Yeah. I really hope that we don't have that like little 15 restriction in the future. That's like a Rust language restriction. It's also one of the things that's very much in flux at the moment, so docs would be invalidated pretty quickly. The asset system, yeah. I don't know that the asset system is necessarily in flux. Compared to other things, like rendering internals. You know, like over the next release cycle, we may see a lot of rendering internals. Change to support Weasel, actually. TBD. But there's like a bunch of file changes and things like that that are going to happen over the next cycle. That's cool. This feels like one of those little known tools that would be helpful in a lot of use cases. Could be a neat video. Little known Bevy tools could change, improve your workflow. Yeah, I think that I probably should do more shorts and stuff. One of the things that is interesting about this kind of thing specifically, right? It's like this crate is cool, it's great, it's whatever. It is the basis of Bevy Asset Loader. Like it's a dependency of Bevy Asset Loader. So if you use Bevy Asset Loader and you've ever looked at the dependencies, then you eventually come across Bevy Common Assets. Yeah, asset streaming is going to be... I don't know anybody that is actively working on asset streaming at the moment. If you know of a PR, I'd be interested in subscribing to it. But yeah, asset streaming is going to happen at some point. So like, I mean, when you talk about it from that perspective, like Bevy in general, if you scroll down in the README, the first thing you hit is actually this warning. Right? Like a new release ships every 3 months. Bevy uses a modern version of Rust. Documentation might be missing. Like this is like the first thing. I know nobody reads this. But like this is the state of Bevy. The state of Bevy is things are being built. Absolutely. So it is what it is. But also the little Bevy tools stuff is like, it's interesting because you have to connect with people at the right time. So basically just doing it all the time makes sense. IRC asset, yeah, streaming. Hey, you skipped several streams. Is custom fork of GLTF library still needed in order to use UV2 data in your game, or anyone who wants to use it in general? Do you need a custom fork? That sounds weird. I don't think you need a custom fork. Bevy supports UV2. I think I'm not going to go into the side quest to check that right now because I want to finish. I want to actually get the input stuff to work before we go on a side quest. But I think the UV2 should work. UV2 is definitely supported by Bevy. Like I have a video about using UV2 stuff. I don't think I used Blender in that video. I think I manually constructed it. Maybe I did use Blender. I don't remember. Actually, I think I can check. Not Skein. UV 2. Can I find my own? Let's not open the dashboard over here. Studio UV. Oh, I put it in Bevy examples, that's why. I started putting more and more stuff in the Bevy examples. Actually, including the video from Friday. The assets, Wiggle, decals. Yeah, I don't have any. This was not a Blender supported. Well, it was Blender supported in the sense that like Blender's UVs are something that I explained in the video, but I don't think I used a Bevy cube. I didn't use a Blender cube. So maybe I'll check that later. Make sure that that works. We were looking at, okay, here's context layering. So context layering here, there's the player, there's swimming. Interesting that they named this player. So player and swimming, there's a bunch of observers for doing different things. Regular binding, swimming binding, apply movement. So moving WASD, space rotates enter to enter the water, swimming binding, space to dive, enter to exit. So enter to enter water. So it turns blue. And then space to rotate. I feel like something messed up there. Context layering. Space rotates, right? Hit enter, hit space. Space still rotates. So is the layering that the rotation is getting eaten here? Regular binding. Is there a priority? Okay, swimming priority 1. I actually don't know if 1 is above or below 0 in the priority queue. Is that in the docs? Determines the evaluation order. Higher priority first. Okay, so the swimming stuff is supposed to happen over the player stuff. which is interesting because this says space to dive, but it's not working. We're supposed to be in the water. This is supposed to be consuming that. So space here, enter to dive. Space should not be rotating. So there's something off about the layering on main branch. Maybe this works on the release. Is there a tag? Yeah, tag. That's GCOV 0.11, right? 0.11.0, was that it? Yeah, cargo run, layering. No, it still works that way. So either I don't understand something here or the example doesn't currently work. Hey guy, how's it going? Yeah, you Unreal gives you access to the code, which is nice, but I also found that was very tough to do. And I appreciate Bevy's like application code and core code being written in the same language. Speaking of GLTF, have you seen the physics extension that's in beta testing at the moment? I have seen a number of GLTF extensions, including the physics extension. But there have been some people who are like trying to push physics GLTF experimental extensions into like Avian or into Skein or something like that. And I don't think that we should really be doing that. Unless the physics extension matches Avian's view of the world, everything's going to be slightly off, which is not going to be good. Especially right now when the extension like isn't confirmed, and thus Blender and Bevy both don't support it, and third-party crates don't support it. So if physics extensions get to the point at which they are implemented in Blender and Bevy supports them, and then Avian decides to also support them, then Skein will support them as well. You've been starting to learn Bevy, real nice, good videos. I'm glad you're enjoying them, finding them useful. So if you want to force something that to always happen, you cram in like usize max or something like that. Yeah, I guess you could do that. Like an ultimate layer. You had a 0.5 output display in all Bevy projects you compiled, including examples. You finally found that you just needed to disable vsync. So I'm a little confused as to why this isn't working. It says dive comes first, preventing rotate, but that is not the behavior that I see. So maybe there's a bug in the layering. This would be great. I would love this. Very, very pro this. Conditions, input, sorting. Maybe I file an issue. It doesn't seem like there's an issue. Maybe there's a pull request. Context layering example seems to not consume input. What is the current main? Let's just make sure that I did actually get this right before I file this issue. So WASD all works. Space rotates. We dive with enter. Space should not be rotating anymore. And then when we hit enter, nothing happens. I feel like the swim controls are never enabled. That's what I feel like is happening here. Let's take a look at the actual code. Let's GCO main because it doesn't matter. Do they not use main? Ew. Ew. Okay, so lib, source, examples, context layering, swim. Are we supposed to make a change here? I don't think so. Because this is just supposed to work, right? Input context player, input context swimming. Let's do something maybe silly like that. Run this again and hope that the insert order doesn't matter. Okay, insert order doesn't matter. That's good. I'm not seeing any of these swimming bindings apply, which is interesting. I have accidentally formatted the entire file. I'm not seeing any swimming stuff happening at all. Players, get mute, trigger, target, unwrap. Let's do an info bind swimming actions. Let's not reformat the entire file. Info bind regular actions. So really all this is doing for me is checking to see if these triggers are actually running. So bind regular actions just fired. If we hit enter, we bind swimming actions, but we're still using the player actions. And every time we hit enter, we bind the swimming actions. So there's something wrong. I don't know what it is because I don't know the crate well enough. But I will add this into the issue. The actions fired are always the player bindings, not the swimming bindings. After entering swimming mode, by hitting enter, let me just one more double check. I definitely check a little bit, maybe more than other people do in this sort of thing, but like just to make sure that the enter key is actually the enter and the exit, and it is the enter and the exit. So I feel comfortable saying after entering swimming mode by hitting enter, all successive enters also try to enter swimming mode, as far as I can tell. Space always rotates the box. I'll let them label it. Look at the preview on this. Current main, swing bindings never accept input. The actions fired are always the player bindings, not the swing bindings. I didn't say what example I was using. This is context layering. Copy paste is always useful instead of retyping this out, because it is possible that I ran the wrong example, right? It's possible. And if I retype it here, then I'm not putting in what I actually did. And if I missed something and this was context layer instead of layering, right? Nobody's going to know that unless I copy and paste what I actually did. So that's why I'm not retyping. That's why I'm going back and copying and pasting. Because if I made a mistake, I want the stuff that I actually did to be in the issue rather than the things that I think that I did. right? Indigo 600, start diving, end diving. Enter water, exit water. Yeah. Okay. So on this, in that, let's do a video. Let's like, one of the things that's really nice from like a maintainer perspective is, hey, this is the behavior I'm seeing. And also, hey, this is literally the behavior I'm seeing. So this is going to be a little demo of like, yes, I am literally seeing, and thus they will actually know that when I say that this is what I'm seeing, that this is what I'm actually seeing. I don't have to like, nobody has to rely on my interpretation of what I saw. I get them to be able to do their own interpretation. Code, link, quote, add file. I feel like this is, oh, that's a terribly compressed video, but oh well. So we've got on this commit current main in the context layering example, we've run it. The swimming bindings never accept input. The actions fired are always the player bindings, not the swimming bindings. After entering swimming mode by hitting enter, all successive enters also try to enter swimming mode, as far as I can tell. Space always rotates the box. And here's the thing happening. That is such a terribly compressed video, but it's fine. At least this is basically like, I assume that they already know at this point, but okay. So we think that context layering is currently bugged, but should work in the future. So we'll move forward with no context layering for now. Now you just need one of those on-screen key input overlays. I actually have that. You know, I actually, not OCR, recording. Is this the button? Show keystrokes, record video. And that's in the video now. So I could have done that. I didn't, because I forgot I had it. Yeah. We're all human. Yeah. I don't think it's that important in this case. It would be useful if I remembered to do it, but I don't think that it's so important, because what's going to happen here is they're going to look at the video, go, yeah, that looks like it's not doing it. They're going to go run it, and they wrote the example, so they already know how it works. Like the thing that indicates the issue is that it shouldn't be rotating once it's in swimming mode. Because it's rotating when it's in swimming mode, that already shows the issue. If it didn't have that rotate functionality, then I think that showing that I was actually hitting enter would be more useful. Or required, actually. Okay, so this is that. We're going to just not look at that for the moment. What other demos are there in here? Anything useful? I think we're good enough to just continue. Oh, a key binding menu. That's cool. Context switch, layering, all conditions, local multiplayer. Cool. So I think that On foot is just what we happen to have. We've got move, we got jump. We don't have them tied to anything at the moment, and we don't have this on the player at the moment. So I think we need to set this on the player. Probably should have looked at that in the code that we were just looking at. I know the context layering example, so I'm going to look at it again. Player box is what they have here, and it is actions player default. So that's what we're going to do. We need to do that where we spawn the player, which is like in here somewhere. So this is our character. This is our player. I'm just going to throw actions on foot default. On foot needs to be pub. I don't think it is currently. We'll throw in the prelude import at the top here. Prelude star. And then I think that controls on foot needs to be pub, right? These other things might need to be pub. We aren't using them yet, so I'm not going to make them yet. So this then needs to come in. And our player should theoretically, assuming that I've set this up correctly, the other thing that I need to do here is add the plugin. Enhanced input plugin, I think. Enhanced input plugin. Did we add this in the main already? I am blanking. We did. So I'm not going to add it here. Let's run this. I appreciate your work on keeping the community updated on Bevy updates. I'm glad you like it. I'm glad you're finding it useful. Just wondering if you know the current status on how close we are to an editor. We are reasonably far from an editor, I would say. We are... The major signs that I would look for are BSN has to land. Right? So this compiles, which is good. BSN has to land, the Bevy scene notation, because the editor needs to read and write a specific format, and BSN is the format. So when BSN lands, there will be a much higher probability that an editor prototype shows up that you can use. The progress on the editor currently is effectively a bunch of prototypes of different things and different areas of work that are moving forward. So Bevy UI is one of those areas that has to move forward. It is moving forward. BSN has to move forward. It's also moving forward. I think the next thing to land BSN style will probably be constructs, but don't hold me to that. Don't assume that that's going to be true. That's just my guess. So a bunch of those things need to land. So we're definitely like not getting an editor in 0.17, I would say. That seems too soon. So 0.18 or later is the best I can say at the moment. Do I think long-term editors will be made in eGUI or Bevy GUI? Bevy UI. If you mean like, what is the Bevy editor going to be built in, for example, Bevy UI is what the Bevy editor is going to be built in. It's not going to be eGUI. 100% not going to be eGUI. Somebody else might build an eGUI version, but the official editor is going to be Bevy UI. Okay, so a bunch of stuff. Let's see if bind actions is getting called. Yeah, the Bevy editor prototype repo is cool. If you want to get involved, there's opportunities to get involved. But there is no like prototype you can actually go grab and like run. There's work on the launcher, there's work on BSN, there's work on Bevy UI, there's widgets and stuff. Yeah, once BSN is done, there's going to be a lot more to do as well. Like the whole editor is actually going to need to become a real thing. And I think BSN is the biggest hang up there. I think BSN is going to be like I don't want to commit anybody to anything. I'm not going to say a version. BSN is coming. BSN is being worked on. I know it's being worked on. BSN is figuring out what a PDF is. You still have to write Adobe Acrobat after that. Yeah, but PDF is a really interesting choice of analogy because PDFs are effectively like Turing complete themselves. Anyway, irrelevant. So our actions are being bound. I guess we don't have any observers doing anything. Is really the issue here. So let's just like, what did we have it doing before? This is our apply controls from before. Should we just uncomment this and then turn it into? Probably not, right? Because a lot of this is Tenua related. So let's leave that as a comment. Our floating height and stuff isn't really gonna change because we deleted it. Maybe the beginning portion is useful. I guess the other thing is like, if this is actually holding input context for us, then this doesn't need to be, how do I frame this? This doesn't need to be apply controls. This can just be jump, right? So maybe we start there instead of trying to do other things. So let's take a look at the Bevy enhanced input. Let's look at the example that we were looking at. This will have the like simple version of how to actually do something. This is bindings. This is a rotate. I think we want fired. We don't want started. Obviously, we are going to have to make our input more sophisticated. So if I'm doing jump fired here, right, then we're going to want things like input buffers and coyote time and things like that, right? So this will turn into like a whole set of things that have to happen at different times. This is going to be an observer, so we're going to add it as an observer. Dot add observer jump. So jump will fire when jump is triggered. In this case, I think we probably don't want the transform. We probably want the linear velocity, right? I think we're still going to have avian components on this. But I don't know that we really need that at the moment because we can just apply forces, right? So we can do like the really simple, silly thing of external force. No, impulse. What do we call these in avian? I don't want a constant force. I want a modules, forces, mass properties, external angular impulse, external impulse. That's what we want. And this is like the worst way to implement jumping, but it's the easiest. I think we still have our rigid body. So all we are going to need to do here is not have transform. We need entity with player. None of this matters because we are literally just going to commands.entity entity or player, I guess, dot insert external impulse, and this is going to be single up here, and we need commands. Player is really what I want here. We don't need mute. This is going to get dereferenced. External impulse needs to come in. How I hit the key combo to move that one word down, I don't know. Let's see, I missed a couple comments. Let's see them. Got a call the moment you asked that question, just got caught up, was all very helpful. Thank you. Perfect. That's something I love about live streams. People can just do whatever they need to do and then watch it later. Have I ever thought about implementing a small neural network and let it learn the game mechanics using reinforcement learning? I have not ever had the desire to do that. The thing that I could have an interest in is like tool assisted speedrunning. That seems like it could be fun. But I don't really have any desire to like write, like I don't see the utility in writing a small neural network and like, I don't know. Like it's not going to help my game, right? If I want an enemy to do something, I'm going to program the enemy to do that thing. If I want the player to do something, I'm going to program the player to do that. I don't really see the application. I'm not saying it's like not something interesting for anybody or whatever. But it's just not something that I'm interested in. I don't think I know a use case for it. I have no interest in vibe coding, just to be clear. I have no interest in talking about it. I have no interest in it existing. You mean you just feel like taking the transform, adding a fixed offset to the up value is probably way worse to do jumping? Yeah, fair. Teleporting is probably a worse way to do jumping. Fine. Neural network could be cool for a life simulator. Genetic algorithm instead of something. A life simulator. I don't think I've played a life simulator. I don't know how life simulators are made. I don't think I've ever played one. External input is not good for health. Applied instantly, whiplash. Yes. Absolutely whiplash. But we are jumping. So that's cool. The camera control is, I think, over in camera, which we've definitely gotten rid of. The accumulated mouse motion, we actually don't have any leaf wing stuff here, do we? Is accumulated mouse motion leaf wing? No. Why did I comment this out? I don't know. Control camera, handle mouse. I guess I just deleted that system. There are a couple cool sims on YouTube, not games, just cool visualizations. Yeah, so like a game of life or like a whatever. Like that's cool. Like I have no problems with that for sure. My mouse control is inverted. Cool. Got this really awkward jump. I feel like I go back and forth on the camera control y-axis. Only one you can think of is this guy writing an evolution simulator, quote unquote, where everything is generated from an approximation of DNA. Yeah, cool. I think that's just an area that, like, there's the area of making art for art's sake, and I love that. There's nothing wrong with that. I love it. This is actually just a photo on the wall over here that I took and printed, and will never. It's just a photo I took, you know. So like programming for art's sake or for enjoyment's sake is wonderful. And there's also game types that I just don't understand, I guess. I think there are, oh man, what's that one game that I'm not going to remember the name of and not be able to describe it all because I never played it. I don't want a game called Evolution. I want, there's like one with little monsters that like evolve or combine or something, and I can't remember the name of it. Spore, yeah, Spore. Thank you. I've never played Spore. I know nothing about Spore. It just sounds topical. This is a 2004 website if I've ever seen one. As far as neural networks and actual like game mechanics, only interesting idea I've seen is bosses that learn how the player plays. I feel like that's fully achievable without networks, is what I'll say. I don't think that having that effect on a player requires a neural network. That seems like very achievable without it, right? Like there are only a certain number of things a player can do. So if the player quick attacks you repeatedly over and over forever, then your boss can know that it's quick attacking you over and over forever, right? And that doesn't require a network. I feel like you would need a specific kind of game for that to be useful. The other thing on my mind is like, if you do successfully train a network to actually be able to react to a player and counter everything they're doing, then the player never wins. If you're successful, right? Which is interesting. Like it's an interesting idea. If you can actually build something that always defeats the player, on some level that's interesting, but is it fun? Classical boss design is built around the boss not learning the player, in your opinion. It would be cool to be subverted, but still. Yeah, I mean, like, on some level, games are art, right? And doing anything in a game is valid. But I wonder, neural networks specifically feel very hard to integrate in a way that is fun and or useful. Okay, so yaw pitch, WASD is the other thing we need. I guess we aren't using whether this is actually fired or not. We're just, you know, every time it's fired, we do this. There was almost certainly a corresponding example for the movement. They use fired, which is really interesting. So every time move is fired, then the trigger event value gets extended with a 0 to get the 3D value. I really don't want that sidebar to pop up all the time. So theoretically, this is enough to get movement. Observer, add move or apply movement. I really need to fix the formatter. You know what? I really think this happens most often when VS Code has updated things behind the scenes and like Rust Analyzer hasn't updated because I haven't actually restarted VS Code. That's when I see this the most. I bet you if I opened a different directory, it would tell me there was a VS Code update. Give me something on the screen, please. Restart VS Code to apply the latest update. I think that's what this is. So at some point I have to restart VS Code, but I had 23 desktops open. So restarting VS Code was a hassle. Yeah, NPC finding the best way to sell alive. Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like one of the interesting things about games in general is that the actual behavior of like enemies achieving things intentionally is actually probably not what you want in most cases. Like, if an NPC successfully figures out how to lie to you using real world information or whatever, based on your behavior or whatever, that has a high potential to just make the player feel stupid. You know? And like, do you want to have that impact on a player? Right? I think going back away from all of that kind of talk and just straight to Baldur's Gate, right? Baldur's Gate has dice rolls, and dice rolls have RNG. If you want to play with pure dice rolls, you can. But by default, Baldur's Gate comes with a little checkbox that's enabled that says if you've run three 1 rolls in a row, then you get a better roll next time. And I think that for the vast majority of people, they want to play in a way that makes them feel good about the way that they're playing. Like they want to have fun playing the game. They don't want to just get lost in a series of 10 single digit rolls, you know? There are people who really want the RNG and they can go into the menu and they can disable it, right? People who want like a true board game experience or whatever. But yeah, I mean, like, for the vast majority of people, I think having that checkbox enabled is really important. The project right now is upgrading. So the game is, I just made some changes, so it'll take a second. I need to move this into a multi-crate workspace too at some point, and we'll get faster compiles. We're upgrading a game to Bevy 0.16. This is the game. I have completely removed the control system from the game. So what you're seeing right now is like the new control system working for the first time. So that's why the jump is absolutely horrid, right? Because it's just an impulse. It's not an actual like designed jump. The camera movement is something we just re-added back. The next thing for me is WASD, but I think that I messed something up. The respawn logic looks like it's not there too. I don't know if y'all can tell, but we're not respawning. There's no respawning happening here. I just hooked up WASD and didn't actually look at what I wrote. So I think that WASD right now, that's wild. It's all impulses right now, I guess. So anyway, it's applying to the wrong axis, clearly. But I ran it early. That's not the way that it's actually going to work. Then you have genres like Benefati games. Yeah. Like rage games. I think those are a very specific kind of thing though, because rage games are deterministic. You can play a rage game and like the one with the guy in the pot with the pickaxe, right? Absolutely deterministic. Your actions define whether you make it to the next level or not. There is no RNG. There's no NPCs lying to you. There's no anything, right? It's just a hard game. Which I think is fine because the player has full control, right? Webcam covers a lot. Webcam is covering like the CLI at the moment. So there's really no there's no value over in that corner at the moment. But I do move the camera around. It might be a little broad question, but how often do you sign interfaces, ensuring clear communications between systems? Interfaces as in like which kind of interfaces? I do a lot of different interface design. Everything from like, I guess I could think of you thinking of the code literal interface, which would be like traits inside of Rust, or do you mean like events, or do you mean like user interfaces, or do you mean like yeah, you might be behind on stream too. I saw you mention Spore earlier, and Spore was a conversation from a while ago. That's fine though. People can be in different places in the stream. Okay, triggered, fired, move. So we basically upgraded from Leafwing Input Manager to Bevy Enhanced Input for 0.16. So this is a 0.16 game now, even though it says 15 on the bottom left because we just upgraded. So we are fired. We're listening to the observer trigger for when we fired move, which is a vec2, which controls directional input, which I think we want to pull our old logic back in, which is this logic. We just dump this here and uncomment it for a second. We can look at basically what we have or had and what we want to do. So this was using axis pair. So this is the value that we're going to get. We're going to get the forward from the forward of the camera itself. We're going to map that effectively to 2D on the XZ plane in our case. My comment really messed up the formatting here, and my formatting is currently broken because VS Code needs an update. So we're really killing it here on the ability to read this code. So really, we don't have action state anymore because we have Bevy enhanced input with fired move. So fired move already gives us this axis pair value. So we don't need that. We are going to need these forward and horizontals. Looking at direction, this is all useful. So let's pull this in. Let's kind of comment out the old code that we had here. It doesn't even do the right thing anyway. The player in this case had a Tenua controller, but we're not going to actually have the Tenua controller anymore because we got rid of Bevy Tenua. So we can't use that. The camera rig and the camera transform are two things we need. So I'll pull these in. We already have player here, players, I guess, but we only have a single player, so I'll do single player. We're not going to mutate the transform. We're going to mutate something like the linear velocity, I think, with player. Again, before this was being used as a basis input for Bevy Tenua, but we don't have Bevy Tenua, so we've basically lost our entire character controller, which does mean that, yes, we do need to rebuild our character controller. So trigger.value is going to be our X and our Y. We have our direction. We have our looking direction. I did see your PR for Tenua. I think that for this project, I might actually move away from Tenua. Yeah, the maintainer is definitely going to do that independently anyway, too. I saw in the comments on your PR that they were going to wait until the stable release to actually do the work to update. And then they did another release for 15 before that anyway. So I'm expecting them to update within the next week or two. But since we are updating and since I am moving from Leafwing to Bevy Enhanced Input Manager, that's not the name of the crate, but you know what I mean. I think we're going to stick with Bevy Enhanced Input to start with. And then whenever Bevy Tenua updates, we'll make a decision about whether we want to move back or not. I think it's interesting stream content to actually build a character controller using Bevy Enhanced Input, even if that character controller isn't as flexible as Bevy Tenua, because it'll give us a little bit more insight into how Bevy Enhanced Input works. And I think that that's useful. So controller holding, this is no longer relevant. The looking direction is applied to what? It is applied to the desired forward direction. So I think that direction and desired velocity are the two things that we kind of can make use of here with the values that we have. So theoretically, this is the desired velocity. We're multiplying by an arbitrary 10, which is great. And then this is our desired forward. So I'll change these to be assignment for the moment, just because that's easier to work with. Less red squiggles. So our desired velocity and our desired forward direction, right? We have a vec3 and an option dir3. The desired forward, if it doesn't exist, then we probably messed something up and probably shouldn't be applying anything. So I'm going to do a let sum here, or let's do, because we can, a question mark. Because now we have result. And in the end, we can OK in observers now. So we get a question mark. Huzzah. You'd need to lock that to be aligned with the ground plane, right? So walking forwards doesn't behave like a fly cam. Yes, that's what we're doing here. Oop, that is not well-formatted code. Right, so we're taking the forward directional from the camera on the XZ plane, and we are turning that into the horizontal. So we aren't doing like a downward trajectory from the camera to the player. We're doing just the horizontal component. So we don't have a rotation currently. So I think I'm just going to ignore the rotation or ignore the desired forward for the moment. because that is really like a where should the character be facing kind of thing. And I think what I'm going to do is just set the velocity. This should be a linear velocity, which I think I can set to desired velocity. But let's find out. There seems to be an error there. Vec3 cannot be dereferenced. Oh, .0 is... Vec3 cannot be dereferenced. So it thinks I'm trying to dereference .0, which means that I think that I can do this. But this is not going to be wrapped in linear velocity anymore. Using horizontal gotcha. Yeah, last time you built one, you used the transform of the player model, which introduced a bunch of jank. Yeah, so because the camera is controllable via the mouse, it felt important to use the camera facing vector to define what forward was. Gotta go eat, have fun, probably port your original game to 0 to 16 avian later in the week. This new spawning API seems fun. Yeah, the new spawning API is great. Have a great dinner. I think you said you didn't say dinner, but have a good food. You don't think this code would always work if the camera is rolled? That could be very true, but we're not rolling our camera. Right, because if we roll the camera, the XZ of the transform is the local XZ minus the rotation. So like we're not applying rotation, so I would expect that to fail. Right? If you were doing like a plane simulation, well, like we aren't factoring in rotation or anything. So expected linear velocity. Why am I messing this up? I guess I don't need the dereference. So we have the looking direction that we aren't using, which would put us facing the right direction. I think this is a quat. No, we multiply by vec3. So I think we could potentially use the quaternion directly, but I'm not terribly concerned about it. Not at the moment, anyway. I'm not setting... This is turning into a marble game, y'all. I'm not setting the... do we not have the locked rotation on? Raycast, animation state. I guess Tenua controller is constantly handling that for us, right? So theoretically, we kind of have to, if we want this to work correctly, set the rotation. Interesting note. The apply movement observer, if we set the linear velocity, only reduces based on friction and whatnot. I think if we continue to build our own character controller, probably what I'm going to do, spin me right round. Probably what I'm going to do is switch over to a kinematic so that we have to do more of the handling ourselves. If we look at Bevy Tenua is a dynamic character controller. It's meant to interact with physics in a certain way. But if we continue building our own, I will probably switch to kinematic because that will force us to write more character controller code. And then we'll have the choice of how we do our character control, right? Because if we look at the avian 3D kinematic, right? By default, not affected by external forces or collisions. So we would have to then do like observers for handling collisions, which we can do now in Avian. They have a new, whatchamacallit, a new observer for collisions. So we can put that observer directly onto our player, which is a really interesting thing in combination with this new input system. So we can put observers directly on like the floating capsule and do things based on that. Based on it colliding with things, and then do things based on other things colliding with things, so et cetera, et cetera. So velocity, et cetera. The engine doesn't modify the value of kinetics, so we would have full control over that, depending on what we wanted to do. For collisions, we could do our own collision math and whatnot, which would mean that we would need to do our own collision math, but would also mean that we are kind of forced into using some of the newer APIs, which I think would be good stream content. Desired forward is currently a dir 3. Can we turn a dir 3 into something that is rotation? This also only fires on move, which is interesting. So realistically, this does need to go into like a desired forward. Yeah. You could theoretically use an observer to do ground detection. I mean, like, you might still want to raycast. But there's a new, where did we use it? We used it recently. Observer collision. We used it in block breaker. I think this is going to be the right one. This actually looks like it might not be the right one. No, this is the wrong one. I always have 15 bajillion directories. Active block breaker 0.16. That's the one I want. So block breaker uses the observer. It's on collision start and on collision end. So you observe, trigger, on collision start, yada yada. In this case, we put the observer on the ball, if I remember correctly. And we check to see if it collides with things that are bricks or the respawn area, etc. So when it comes to raycasting, I actually don't know how this would interact, because this is enabled via, if we go to the ball, wherever the ball is, this is enabled by collision events enabled, which means it's a component on the thing that you are observing collision events for. There's also no documentation yet because it's not released yet. This is Git main. So shrug. We probably still need raycast at some point. If we did like a capsule that sat below the player and that controlled how deep into the ground it could go, then we would be able to use that. But yeah, TBD. But interesting questions like that come up. And I think that solving those questions is really interesting. Character controls are really complicated, but that might be a good, this is not what I want to do. That might be a good project for the next cycle. Like building a character controller and showing people how to do that. Can we turn this into a quat? dir3. dir3 as vec3 from xyz. Slurp. Yeah, we were thinking about in the forum of saying going from the falling input context to an on-ground input context. Yeah. Yeah, I think that a lot of interesting questions like that are coming up, right? And theoretically, we would be able to, I'm trying to think about, so like on ground versus something like Coyote Time, right? Where you were on the ground, that needs to have some state. That state needs to, as you switch input contexts, disappear over time. I'm curious as to how to best implement that given Bevy enhanced inputs ability to use layered input contexts. So, interesting things, right? Like that is an interesting question, I feel like, and an interesting potential stream. What do I want to do here? I want to do the rotation, right, of the transform. So transform, can we do transform rotation? Rotation has to be quat. Quat, can we do from vec3? From xyz? From vec4? I don't think a quat from vec3 makes a lot of sense. We would have to extend it with w. Yeah. From axis angle sounds more like what we want. So from y-axis with the angle that our vec gives us, right? From axis angle with, does it need to be normalized? We'll panic if axis is not normalized, but what about, so vec3 y will give us that unit vec, and then our desired forward needs to be an angle, actually, and we're using a dir3 here. So really we need desired forward.xz.to angle and player dot 1, because that's where I'm going to put it, rotation equals that. And this needs to be yada yada, mute transform, desired velocity. Interesting that that is, no, because this was a linear velocity and now we need .0.0. So hopefully this keeps us in the direction that we are supposed to be facing. Yeah, the direction is normalized. I don't know that it's normalized in all of the best ways. Oh, yeah, overlapping queries, transform and transform, camera transform. Let's do I think just the one is fine, right? Okay. My mouse controls are off. So we have more issues, including the fact that we don't actually have gravity applied. Uh, oh God. Okay. And it's very jumpy and whatnot. And it's reversed. Yeah. It's kind of reversed from where I want it to be rotationally, I think. Like if I'm moving left, I want it to rotate left with me, and it's rotating in the opposite direction. So plenty of work to do, but also this is the other thing that I'm interested in. We do need to keep that state around, and we do need to apply that state if there's no input. So this actual movement needs to apply to like a character controller that we don't have currently, that then applies to the player. Gravity schmavity. How am I handling collisions? Currently, obviously, we're not, but we're using avian overall. Avian's colliders are what we are using for all collision, all physics. The Also, I just want to be clear that like we fully ripped out a very complex character controller and are now stepping back into from zero with a new input manager actually having any control over the character at all. So this is like ground zero of doing anything. Just to be clear about like the status of why it looks like that and what's going on here. So we do need to start our character controller. I think that's not a today thing. I think today, getting through all the conversation that we did and then getting Bevy enhanced input actually working is the goal, and we got that. The thing here is because we're not using, we basically don't get an event if move is not fired, right? And move is not fired if it's 0, is my understanding, right? Because we can do info here. So this kind of forces us into having that like character controller, similar to this like camera rig, right? It kind of forces us into applying this to something that then gets applied. Because if I move forward, I guess is it currently applying movement? No. So it's not applying movement anymore, which means that the direction that we were looking at doesn't actually get fixed because no movement was applied. So that's one of those things that we need to store the last desired position and then apply that to this rotation, right? We need to constantly kind of correct our y-axis rotation for this character. But if we are not applying movement, then it is not doing that. So here you can see I'm moving forward, it's stuck there. And if I move different ways, it's moving actually in the opposite way of what I want it to at the moment. But that said, all of the input works. It's just reversed from what Bevy Tenua thought it was doing. So we need to reverse some stuff. We do need to build up our character controller from scratch now, which is going to be probably a multi-week project at the end of the day. But other than that, this is on Bevy 0.16. The upgrade process was not bad. The only thing I got stuck on during the upgrade process, which we did last week and this week, is I have a custom shader here for a lot of the materials, and that custom shader needed a small fix. So I think that's it for today. I'm going to format all this code and whatnot. Excited for our new character controller adventures, honestly. I do really like the vibe of Bevy enhanced input. I think there's a lot of things to like about it. I am looking forward to gaining more experience with it. I think building a character controller is going to give us that experience. And if we get lucky, it might even give us opportunities to give feedback on the design of the crate. Because my understanding is that it eventually will become the thing that gets upstreamed, but is not currently the thing being upstreamed. So, like, if we can write a character controller using Bevy enhanced input, use that to give structured feedback for the APIs and whatnot, then that theoretically would be useful. But that's it for today. I'm going to get lunch because I need food. 4 hours is too long for me to not consider eating something, especially since I didn't actually eat breakfast. Have a great day, the rest of y'all. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you Monday for some more educational, some more like small basic game kind of stuff. So like Block Breaker, 2048, Snake, that kind of thing. Have a great rest of your day, y'all.